Hello, my wonderful story lovers, and thank you for being here. Get ready for Anna and Aleksandr. What happens when a librarian shushes a Bratva boss? He buys the library. What happens when she teaches him to read? Pure tension. Chapter 1. Anna, the clock on the wall, a large yellowing plastic circle donated by the Friends of the Easton Library in 1983, issued its loudest, most profound click. 8:58 p.m. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The sound of it, a quiet whoosh in the cavernous, hallowed silence of the Easton Branch Library, was my true signal to close. 2 more minutes, and this sanctuary was officially mine for the night. A silent kingdom where I was the sole, watchful ruler. My sanctuary. It was a foolish, sentimental thought, but I allowed myself to have it every evening as I powered down the last terminal. This place was more than a job. It was my armor. The world outside, beyond these thick brick walls and tall, arched windows, was a cacophony. It was sirens that wailed with human grief, buses that hissed and groaned, and people who shouted into their phones as if their volume equated to their importance. The world outside was too fast, too bright, too loud. But in here, the only sounds were the respectful thud of a book being placed on a table, the whisper-thin shift of pages turning, and the rheumatic, companionable groan of the ancient radiators kicking on as the evening chill set in. Tonight, it was just the radiators and the high, steady hum of the fluorescent lights, a sound so constant it had become synonymous with silence. I was alone, and it was perfect. I loved this place with a desperate, aching, almost human ferocity. I loved the smell, a complex bouquet of old paper, acidic ink, binding glue, floor wax, and the faint, sweet trace of the lemon polish I used on the massive oak circulation desk every Friday. I loved the worn patches on the royal blue carpet in the children's section, a map of forgotten story times, a testament to decades of small bodies gathered in rapt attention. I loved the high, dusty windows that were, at this moment, black, glossy mirrors, reflecting the quiet rows of shelves, my own small, pale frame a ghost behind the counter. My hand rested on the checkout scanner, its dormant red light a sleeping eye. I was finishing the last of the reshelving logs, a meticulous, soothing ritual that brought order to the chaos of the day. Each entry was a tiny click of my mouse, a small, satisfying affirmation that everything was in its proper place. Order was why this place mattered, and it was why my heart, for the last 3 months, had been in a constant, low-grade state of panic. Underfunded, the city council called us in their sterile meeting minutes. Non-essential. Prime real estate for redevelopment. I called us a haven. For Mrs. Petrov, a widow with eyes as sad and deep as the Baltic Sea, who came in every Tuesday to read the Russian-language newspapers and feel, for one precious hour, like she wasn't so far from her lost home. For the kids from the nearby shelter, who had nothing, but who treated our worn-out 70s-era beanbag chairs like thrones and devoured graphic novels as if they were a feast. For me, a woman who had always found more comfort in the company of fictional characters than real ones. The final budget meeting was next week. I'd already printed the Save Our Library flyers on my own dime, using the library's ancient, groaning printer after hours. They were stacked neatly by the door, a pathetic little paper shield against a bulldozer of city council progress. If they closed this place, I couldn't finish the thought. It was a physical pain, a closing of the throat. Where would Mrs. Petrov go? Where would the kids go? Where would I go? I pushed the thought down, hard, focusing instead on the final, satisfying click as I closed the program. 8:59 p.m. Time to walk the perimeter. I grabbed the heavy ring of keys from the hook beneath the desk. Their familiar, weighty jangle was the only sound as I stepped out from behind my wooden fortress. Thud jangle, thud jangle. My sensible, rubber-soled loafers on the linoleum, paired with the keys in my hand. It was the rhythm of my life, the sound of closing one day and preparing for the next. I passed the new fiction display I'd arranged just this morning, fanning the covers out in an appealing, colorful arc. I checked the lock on the periodicals room, rattling it gently. It was secure. I moved toward the children's section, my footsteps slowing, my gaze softening. I straightened a board book copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar that had been left askew on a low shelf. Everything was in its place. All was quiet. And then the world exploded. The heavy front doors, solid oak and reinforced glass, that were meant to be opened with a respectful push, were thrown open with such unadulterated violence that they slammed against the interior brick walls. The crash of wood and glass hitting brick was a sonic boom. It was so loud, so utterly alien and wrong in this sacred space, that I dropped my keys. They hit the floor with a dissonant, screaming clang skitter, the sound echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. I froze, my hand flying to my throat. A useless, reflexive gesture of self-preservation. My heart, which had been beating at its placid librarian's rhythm, didn't just speed up. It detonated. It was a trapped, frantic bird, slamming itself against the cage of my ribs. A man stormed in. He wasn't a man. He was a natural disaster. He was a mountain. He was a walking storm cloud crammed into a bespoke suit, so dark it seemed to drink the light, the fabric straining across shoulders that were wider than my desk. He was on his phone and he was yelling. It wasn't English. It was a harsh, guttural language that sounded like rocks breaking, like an avalanche. Russian, I thought, my mind flashing instantly to Mrs. Petrov's gentle murmuring. But he didn't sound like Mrs. Petrov. He sounded like thunder. Я сказал, что это неприемлемо. His voice wasn't just loud, it was a physical force, a deep baritone roar that seemed to vibrate in my bones, rattling the very windows in their frames. He was already halfway to the history section, his massive, polished shoes striking the floor like hammers. Thud, thud, thud. Each footfall was an act of aggression. My brain, the small, sensible, terrified part of me, was screaming. Hide. Get behind the desk. Crawl under it. Get to the phone. Call 911. Panic button. We don't have a panic button, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, not just by fear, but by the sheer unholy sacrilege of it. He was loud. In my library. He wasn't alone. My panicked eyes darted to the door. 2 other men, both in similar dark, expensive suits, had followed him in. They were smaller. Everyone on Earth was smaller than him, but they were just as terrifying. They were built like refrigerators, all sharp angles and impassive, watchful-eyed stillness. They posted themselves on either side of the doorway, hands clasped in front of them, their eyes scanning the room with a cold, professional assessment. They were shadows, guardians. They were walls that had just sealed me in. The mountain, meanwhile, seemed to have forgotten they, or I, or the entire concept of a library, existed. He paced in front of the American Civil War section, a general surveying a battlefield, his voice escalating with every word. Tattoos, dark and intricate, snaked up from his crisp white collar and covered the backs of his massive hands. One of those hands, the one not holding the phone, gestured wildly, slicing the sacred quiet into ribbons. Unichtodjada ich však. Mnev se ravno. Destroy them all. I don't care. Then he did the unforgivable. He kicked a chair. It wasn't a cheap folding chair. It was a solid oak reading chair, beautifully carved, that had been here since 1954. He didn't just kick it. His polished shoe connected with its leg and sent it skittering across the polished linoleum, where it crashed into a shelf of biographies with a sickening, splintering thwack. Something in me snapped. It wasn't bravery. I am not a brave person. I am a person who returns her shopping cart in the rain. I am a person who apologizes when someone else bumps into me. No, this was not bravery. This was a pure, primal, Librarian rage. It was the terror of the budget cuts, the love for the worn-out carpet, the fierce, quiet loyalty to Mrs. Petrov and the kids from the shelter, all compressed into a single, diamond-hard point of fury. He was defiling my sanctuary. He was the bulldozer, given human form. My feet were moving before my brain gave them permission. Click-clack, click-clack. The sound was laughably small, too weak against his raging. He didn't even see me. I was an ant approaching a bear. I was a moth flying at a searchlight. He turned, still roaring into the phone, and nearly ran me over. He stopped. His chest. A wall of black wool just inches from my face. I had to crane my neck to look up. And up. And up. He was enormous. His shoulders blocked out the fluorescent lights, casting me in his shadow. The clean, sharp, intoxicating scent of ozone, expensive cologne, and something metallic, like cold iron, rolled off him, suffocating me. His eyes, when they finally flickered down from his invisible war, landed on me. I was going to die. Here, between biography and history. I was going to be a chalk outline on the linoleum. His eyes were not the eyes of a person. They were chips of glacial ice, pale blue and utterly empty. They were empty of anger, empty of surprise. They were empty of everything. They just saw. And in their cold, analytical depths, I was nothing. A speck of dust on his lapel. He paused his tirade, but he didn't lower the phone. He just stared down at me, his gaze so heavy it felt like a physical weight. My entire body was a single resonating tremor. I could feel the blood draining from my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick. I was sure no sound would come out. But the librarian in me was stronger than the fear. This was my house. I don't know where it came from. I planted my feet. I lifted my chin. I even stamped my foot, a small, ridiculous thud from my loafer. And then I did the loudest, most dangerous thing I have ever done in my life. I inhaled. Shh. The word ripped out of my throat, not a whisper, not a request, but a harsh, desperate, air-tearing bark. It was the sound of a terrified terrier yapping at a wolf. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated, suicidal frustration. The world stopped. He didn't move. The men at the door didn't move. Even the old radiators seemed to fall silent, their groans dying in their pipes. The silence that followed was not my comfortable, book-filled peace. It was a vacuum. It was the airless, agonizing pressure before a bomb detonates. His ice-chip eyes narrowed, just a fraction. He looked at me. Not at me, but into me. He was dissecting me, from my frizzy brown bun that was surely trembling, down to my sensible shoes. He was cataloging me. I was sure he could hear my heart, that frantic, stupid bird pounding itself to death. I could not breathe. I could not move. This was it. He stared, and stared. An entire agonizing minute ticked by on the plastic wall clock. Click, click, click. Then, very slowly, his gaze still locked on mine, he raised the phone back to his mouth. One word. It was cold, deep, and absolute. Pardon. Later, he hung up. The click of the phone ending the call was as loud as the doors slamming open. He pocketed the device in his suit jacket. Then he took one step toward me. I flinched, my eyes squeezing shut. I was drowning in his scent, in his presence. I was a mouse, and the hawk's shadow was on me. But he didn't touch me. He leaned down. It felt like a skyscraper bending. He was so close I could see the silver stubble on his hard jaw, the intricate, beautiful, terrifying weave of the ink on his neck. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure he could hear it. He said nothing. Not to me. He looked right at me, his eyes pinning me to the floor like a butterfly to a board, and spoke past me, his voice a calm, gravelly rumble that vibrated inside my chest. "Dmitri?" One of the shadows at the door stepped forward, his shoes silent. "Da, Pakhan." The mountain never looked away from me. "Buy it." The shadow Dmitri paused. I could hear the confusion in his voice. "Pakhan." "Buy what?" "The chair?" "It," the mountain said, his voice terrifying in its sudden, absolute, bored calm. He gestured, a flick of his massive, tattooed hand that encompassed the shelves, the desk, the worn-out carpet, and me. All of it. And with that, he turned. The spell was broken. He straightened to his full, impossible height, and without a backward glance, he stalked out of the library. His 2 men fell in behind him, 2 shadows following the dark. The heavy oak doors clicked shut with a dreadful, quiet finality. I was alone. The silence that rushed in was deafening, a roaring in my ears. I stood, frozen, in the history section for a full minute, my body shaking so violently my teeth chattered. I looked down. My keys were still on the floor, a glittering, jangled mess by the American Civil War shelf. I finally uncurled my fists. My palms were wet. I looked at them. They were bleeding. 4 perfect crimson crescent moons were dug into each one. I had been clenching my fists so hard my nails had broken the skin. I hadn't even felt it. I staggered back to the circulation desk, my legs like water. I looked at the Save Our Library flyers, stacked so neatly, so hopefully. "Buy it," he had said. "All of it." I sank into my chair, the plastic wheels squeaking in protest. My hand fumbled and landed on the checkout stamp. I gripped it, its smooth, heavy wooden handle the only solid, real thing in a world that had just tilted off its axis and spun into madness. 8:58 p.m. The clock on the wall hadn't even moved.
Chapter 2. Aleksandr. The door of the Maybach clicked shut, a sound as precise and final as a vault closing. It encased me in a tomb of armor-plated silence. Outside, the rain began to fall, a cold, gray drizzle that slicked the streets of this gray, uninspiring city. Inside, the only sound was the faint, turbine-like hum of the engine and the soft whisper of the climate control. Dmitri was in the passenger seat, his shoulders rigid, his hands on his knees. He knew better than to speak. My fury was a cold thing, not a hot one, and it had a blast radius he'd learned long ago to respect. My hands were resting on my knees. They were steady. They were always steady. But inside my chest, the cold, black furnace of my rage was still burning at full capacity. Vasquez, the mariposa, the butterfly, a ridiculous, effeminate name for a man who dealt in razor blades and fentanyl. He'd hit my shipment at the docks, a clean, tactical strike that spoke of inside information. It was precise, and it was bloody. 4 of my men, good men, men with families I personally provided for, were gone. Millions in product, raw and uncut, vaporized. It was an act of war. A test. The Vasquez cartel was sniffing, trying to see if the bear of the Bratva, Aleksandr Volkov, had gone soft in this new American territory, away from the frozen, familiar streets of Moscow. I had been on the phone with my polkovnik, colonel, in Brighton Beach, the man who ran my East Coast operations. I was in the white-hot center of giving the order. The order was simple. Unichtozhte ich všech, destroy them all. I didn't care about the cost, the noise, or the diplomatic fallout with the other familias. I cared about the message. You touch what is mine, and I will erase you from the earth. I had been pacing, my voice a weapon when it happened. Shush! My rage, a physical thing, A pressure behind my eyes and a tightness in my gut had simply evaporated. It didn't fade. It vanished, sucked into a vacuum. I had turned, my mind still calculating body counts and logistics, and looked down. At her. I'd seen her when I walked in, of course. A small, drab thing, a flicker of beige and brown in my peripheral vision. I'd registered her as I register all furniture in a room. Irrelevant, an obstacle. She was nothing, but then she'd stamped her foot. I replayed the moment in my mind, the sheer, exquisite, magnificent absurdity of it. She was nothing, a sparrow, a mouse. She was all frizzy, escaping hair, a cheap cardigan the color of oatmeal, and hands that were probably stained with ink. And she was terrified. I could smell it on her. Her fear was a sharp, coppery tang in the air, a scent so potent it overpowered the library's dominant smell of old paper and lemon wax. Her eyes were huge, green and gold, and dilated with a terror so profound it was a wonder she was still standing, her heart surely about to explode. And yet, she had shushed me. Me. Aleksandr the Bear Volkov, the Pakhan of the Volkov Bratva, a man who had made vori v zakone, thieves-in-law, men twice his age with murder in their souls, go pale and silent with a single bored look. A man who had not been shushed since he was 5 years old, and even then his nanny had been summarily fired for the disrespect. A low sound rumbled in my chest. It was not a growl, it was a laugh. Dmitri flinched in the front seat, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. He looked like I'd just pulled a gun on him. He hadn't heard me laugh in months, and never, ever like this. It was a sound of pure, dangerous disbelief. "Boss?" His voice was hesitant, tight. He was wondering if I'd finally cracked. "A mouse," I said, my voice rough. "A tiny little library mouse." It squeaked. Dmitri, my most loyal and unimaginative soldier, was completely lost. "Boss, Vasquez, the orders." "Vasquez will burn." I cut him off, the coldness returning instantly, the furnace door slamming shut. I want his head, and I want his operation in ashes by dawn. I want him to know it was me. I want him to know he died because he was stupid. Is that clear? Da, Pakhan, of course. "But first," I said, leaning back against the supple, hand-stitched leather, a slow smile touching my lips. It felt foreign. "Call the lawyers." Dmitri's confusion was a palpable thing. "The lawyers, boss? For the retaliation? To handle the fallout?" "No." I stared out the window at the library. The lights were still on. I could see her small, rigid silhouette through the rain-streaked glass, still standing by the desk. She was holding something, a stamp, like a tiny, useless, primitive weapon. "I want this building. Call the city, find out who runs it. Tell them I am making a philanthropic donation, an endowment, a very large one, whatever it takes. I want the deed by morning." Dmitri was, for the first time in our 5-year association, utterly speechless. He just stared. "Boss? You want the library?" "I want the library," I confirmed. I thought of her. Management, the sheer, suicidal, magnificent fire in those terrified eyes. She was either the bravest woman I had ever met, or the most profoundly stupid. I found myself deeply, dangerously fascinated to find out which. "It is a good tactical position," I added, giving him a reason his logical soldier's brain could process. He needed a box to put this in. "Neutral territory, quiet. No one watches the library." It will be a good, clean place for meetings. A perfect front. Yes, Pakhan. He was already on his phone. The relief in his voice immediate. He had a tangible order. He had a reason. He understood logistics. He did not understand whims. He didn't need to. He just needed to obey. I closed my eyes. I had a war to run. I had millions to recoup. I had a man to hunt and kill. But all I could see were two terrified, defiant green-gold eyes. All I could hear, echoing in the silence of the Maybach, was that single, sharp, impossible sound. Shush. By noon the next day, the library was mine. The city council, it turned out, was pathetically overjoyed. They were a week away from voting to close the failing Easton branch. My lawyers hadn't even had to threaten anyone. They'd simply offered a check with enough zeros to make the mayor weep with gratitude. The Easton Community Endowment, as my lawyers had elegantly named it, was now the sole private owner of the building, its contents, and its liabilities, and by extension, its staff. I walked in at 12:05 p.m. The closed for inventory sign was already on the door, put there by my men an hour earlier, much to the confusion of a few elderly patrons. The library was just as I remembered it. Silent. Still. It smelled of her. Paper and... I identified it now. Vanilla. Faint and sweet like a memory. I found her where I knew I would. In the back office. It was a tiny, cramped room, no bigger than a walk-in closet, smelling of microwave, reheated coffee, dust, and more old books. She was packing. A small, pathetic brown cardboard box sat on her desk, half full of cheap picture frames, a chipped "I read past my bedtime" mug, and a wilted-looking succulent. She was trying to wrestle a worn, soft-covered copy of Pride and Prejudice into the corner of the box when I leaned against the doorframe. Going somewhere, my Shinnok? Little mouse. My voice was soft. In my world, it is the quiet tones, not the roars, that signal true danger. She jumped so violently, she dropped the book. It hit the floor with a soft, defeated whoomp. She spun around, her hand flying to her chest, just as it had last night. Her face, when she saw me, went from pale to snow white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You," she finally whispered. It was all she could manage. Me. I didn't move from the doorway, enjoying the way I filled it. I blocked the only exit. I blocked the light from the main room. We were in our own little world, she and I. "What do you want?" Her voice was shaking, but she was trying to hide it. There it was again. That tiny, flickering pilot light of fire. Amazing. "You have to leave, we're closed. You can't be here." "I can be anywhere I want," I corrected her gently. "Especially here." I came to inspect my new property. Her brow furrowed in confusion. "This is a public library. This is city property. You can't... You're trespassing." It was a public library. I took a single step into the room. It was so small that one step brought me almost face to face with her. She had to crane her neck to look at me, and I had the sudden absurd urge to see if I could span her entire tiny waist with one hand. The city of Easton, as of 9:15 this morning, accepted a very generous endowment. This building, this sanctuary, was failing Anna. I'd had Dmitri run her file. Anna Petrova, 26, master's in library science, orphan, no living relatives, no attachments, clean record, not so much as a parking ticket. She was a ghost, a non-entity. Her eyes widened. The use of her name a clear, cold shock. How do you know my— "The Save Our Library flyers," I lied, gesturing to the stack I'd seen by the door. A commendable effort, but unnecessary. I saved it. She stared at me, her mind clearly racing, the pieces slowly, horribly clicking into place. You bought the library?" "I did." I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Which means I am not your patron. I am your owner." I'd expected tears, begging, hysteria. I got rage. Her little chin came up, her hands fisted at her sides. "You can't own a library. And you certainly don't own me," I quit. "No," I said, my voice still gentle. I took the last step. I was on her side of the desk now. She was trapped between me and the wall. She backed up, her spine hitting the filing cabinet. I leaned in, placing one hand on the cabinet, caging her in. "You don't. Your employment as of 9:15 a.m. was transferred to the endowment. You are no longer a city employee, my Shinnok. You are my employee." I could feel the heat rolling off her. I could see the pulse hammering in her throat, a frantic little bird. I was close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. They were defiant. "I won't work for you, a thug, a monster." A thug, I mused, dangerously amused. And also the man who just signed your paycheck and saved your precious, what did you call it? Sanctuary. I am the only reason these doors will open tomorrow. I paused. "This is a lovely little office. You will be moving your things out." Her mouth fell open. "You're firing me?" "No, Anna. I'm relocating you." I tapped the wall. "I'll be taking this office. My import-export business requires a headquarters. This location is quiet, anonymous, perfect. You're going to run a criminal enterprise out of a library?" She hissed, her voice a desperate, furious whisper. "I am going to run a business," I corrected her softly. "And you are going to continue being a librarian. You will check out books. You will read to the children. You will keep this place running, just as you always have. You will be the perfect, quiet little shield. And you will stay out of my way." I leaned in, just a fraction closer. She was pressed flat against the wall, trembling, but she didn't look away. She smelled so clean, vanilla and paper and fury. "You're terrified," I whispered, "but you're not screaming. You're angry. You're the little mouse who roared at the bear." I find that compelling. Most people are boring. You are not boring, Anna. I pushed off the cabinet, giving her room to breathe. "Your new desk is the main circulation counter. Be here tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. We have a lot of work to do." I walked to the door and paused, looking back at her. She was still pressed against the wall, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a potent, terrified hatred that was the most interesting thing I'd seen all year. Yes. This was so much better than a toy. This was going to be an education for us both. "Welcome to the Volkov endowment, Anna," I said. "I'm sure you'll be very quiet."
Chapter 3. Anna. It is a special kind of psychological torture to be a prisoner in your own sanctuary. My life, which had once been measured by the gentle thud of a checkout stamp and the rustle of turning pages, was now a surreal, silent scream. It had been a week of existing in an occupied territory. He had been true to his word. The library was open, but it was no longer a library. It was a front. My tiny, cluttered, coffee-scented office was gone. He was in there now. The door, which I had always kept open, was now perpetually, menacingly closed. But it wasn't soundproof. Nothing in this ancient, underfunded building was. And Aleksandr Volkov was a loud man. It wasn't just his phone calls, those deep baritone rumbles of Russian that vibrated with a frequency I felt in my teeth. It was his presence. When he walked, the floorboards in the old history section groaned in protest under his weight. When he opened his office door, the air pressure in the entire building seemed to shift, sucking the quiet out, replacing it with his scent of ozone, iron, and expensive cologne. He had relocated me, as promised, to the main circulation desk. My old fortress was now my prison. I felt like a zoo animal, perched on a high stool, completely exposed. His men, Dmitri, the Shadow, and a rotating cast of 2 others, who looked like they'd been carved from granite, used the main reading room as their personal waiting area. They were the most terrifying patrons I'd ever had. They never read, they never spoke except in low, hushed whispers to each other. They just sat. They would take a chair, always one facing the door, and they would watch. Their presence was a suffocating blanket of quiet menace. My regulars, my real patrons, felt it too. The kids from the shelter, who used to burst in with shouts and laughter, now crept in. They'd grab their graphic novels, their eyes darting nervously toward the suited statues by the windows, and retreat to the children's section, where they read in a tense, unhappy silence. They left hours earlier than they used to. Only Mrs. Petrov was undeterred. In fact, she seemed impressed. On Tuesday, she had come in as usual, her small, stooped frame wrapped in her familiar wool coat. She'd paused, her gaze landing on Dmitri. She'd looked at him, then at the closed office door, then back at Dmitri. Her sad eyes had sharpened with a sudden, shocking understanding. She'd walked straight past me, gone to the Russian-language newspapers, and then, on her way out, she'd stopped at my desk. "That man," she'd whispered, her voice dry as old paper. "The one in your office. He is a serious person. He's the new patron, Mrs. Petrov. From the endowment." She had patted my hand, her skin cool. "No, Dorogaya," she'd said, her gaze holding a lifetime of knowledge I didn't possess. "That is not a patron. That is a Pakhan." She had looked toward the office door, and then she'd done the most terrifying thing of all. She'd made a small, respectful sign of the cross and left. I was the only one here who didn't understand the rules. I was just the mouse, trapped in the bear's new den, and he couldn't even be bothered to be a quiet bear, which brought me to Thursday. Story time. It was 10:30 a.m., and I had my 3 most loyal attendees, 2 toddlers, and a very sleepy-looking baby in a stroller. It was the 1 half-hour of the week that felt remotely normal. I was sitting on the little wooden stool in the children's section, my copy of Where the Wild Things Are open on my lap. And Max said, "Be quiet," I whispered, doing the voice. "Anna!" My entire body seized. It wasn't one of the children. It was his voice. It wasn't a roar, not like the first night, but it was loud. It was a command, a bellow coming from behind his closed door, 50 feet away. He was on the phone, but it sounded like he was standing next to me. One of the toddlers, a little girl named Maya, burst into tears. "It's okay, sweetie, it's okay," I soothed, my heart hammering. But the spell was broken. Story time was over. The mothers, looking pale and apologetic, gathered their children and fled, their eyes cutting to the office door with undisguised fear. I sat there alone on the tiny stool, the book open in my lap. Max, in his wolf suit, was staring up at me, king of all wild things. And I snapped. It was the same feeling from the first night. That blind, librarian-driven rage. He'd scared the children. He'd violated the last clean, safe part of my library. He had ruined story time. I was not brave enough to confront him. I was not stupid enough to shush him again. But I was a librarian. And librarians, when faced with barbarians, have their own weapons. We have notes. My hand was shaking, but my purpose was firm. I marched back to the circulation desk. I tore a sheet from a bright yellow legal pad. I grabbed my best black felt-tip pen. My handwriting, usually a neat, flowing cursive, was sharp and rigid. To the occupant of the back office. This is a public library, a place of quiet study and community gathering. Your constant, disruptive volume is frightening the children and making it impossible for other patrons to concentrate. Please remember to use your inside voice. Thank you, management. I read it over. Occupant. Good. Anonymous. Frightening the children. A well-deserved guilt trip. Inside voice. The perfect, condescending professional touch. And management. It was my only claim to authority. A flimsy paper shield. My heart was in my throat. This was insane. This was a death wish. This was like taping a "please don't maul me" note to the nose of a grizzly. I did it anyway. I walked the 50 feet to his door. The wood itself seemed to vibrate with the low thunder of his voice. I could hear Dmitri and the other one breathing in the main room. I knew they were watching me. I didn't care. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the tape. I fumbled, the plastic sticking to my fingers. Come on, Anna. I took a deep breath, slapped the note onto the center of the door, right at eye level, and smoothed it down with a sweaty palm. Then I walked, I did not run, back to my desk. I sat there, my spine rigid, my blood roaring in my ears, and waited to be fired, or murdered. The options felt about 50-50. His door didn't open. The afternoon ticked by. The granite statues by the window were replaced by 2 other granite statues. The library closed. I locked the doors, my hands still shaking, the note still untouched. The next morning I arrived in a state of pure, gut-churning dread. The note was gone. My stomach dropped. He was in his office. I could hear the low murmur of his voice. He was just going to ignore it. Or worse, he was waiting. I sat at my desk, trying to process the morning's new book arrivals, but my eyes kept darting to his door. Around 10 a.m., I went to the staff break room, which was now just a sad little corner behind the young adult stacks, to make a cup of tea. When I came back, there was a single, folded piece of paper on my desk blotter. My blood ran cold. He had been here. At my desk. In my space. It was my yellow note. He hadn't thrown it away. He'd just returned it. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. My message was still there. And beneath it, scrawled in a sharp, bold, surprisingly neat cursive that looked utterly arrogant, was his reply. 2 words, noted. Ownership. I stared at it. I read it again, and again. My terror was suddenly, bizarrely eclipsed by a hot, sharp spark of fury. The condescending arrogance. The audacity. Ownership. He was teasing me. He was playing a game. He'd received my passive-aggressive message and returned it with a power move that was just as passive-aggressive and infinitely more menacing. I was so angry I was almost vibrating. This was a war. The war escalated an hour later. Dmitri and the other guard, a man I'd privately nicknamed Lurch, carried in a large wooden crate. It was not a cardboard box. It was a crate, the kind that looked like it should have "fragile" and "this end up" stenciled on it, the kind that required a crowbar. They dropped it with a heavy, resounding thud in the middle of the main floor, the sound echoing up to the rafters. "From the boss," Dmitri said, his voice flat. "A donation." "A donation?" I looked at the raw wood. "What is it? Shelving?" "He said you would know what to do with them," Dmitri replied, utterly unhelpful. He produced a crowbar from somewhere, and with 2 sharp, violent movements pried the lid off. The shriek of nails being pulled from wood made me jump. He and Lurch removed the lid and left. Just left me there, with an open crate and a pile of wood shavings. I peered inside, my curiosity overriding my fear. The crate was filled with straw, and nestled in that straw, I saw the deep, rich gleam of old leather and gold leaf. My breath caught. Slowly, as if approaching a sleeping animal, I reached in. My fingers brushed against a leather-bound spine. It was cool, the leather supple and impossibly smooth. I pulled it out. It was a first edition, a 19th century copy of Anna Karenina, in the original Russian. My hands, the librarian's hands, knew what they were holding. This wasn't a book. This was an artifact. The paper was vellum, heavy and cream-colored. The gold leaf on the title was immaculate. This belonged in a museum, or a billionaire's private, climate-controlled vault. I reached in again, and again. A matching copy of War and Peace, a dark, blood-red binding of Crime and Punishment, a complete 10-volume set of Pushkin's poetry. I must have pulled out 24 books, each one more priceless than the last. I was surrounded by a dragon's horde of Russian literature. A donation, I whispered, my voice shaking. I knew with the same certainty that I knew my own name that every single one of these books was stolen. This was plunder. This was the spoils of a war I couldn't imagine, taken from a library or a private home that had probably been ransacked. This was blood money turned into literature. It was the most horrifying, cynical, monstrous thing I had ever seen. It was also the most beautiful. I was torn, my soul split in two. The librarian in me was weeping with sheer, unadulterated awe. My tiny, failing branch, with its water-stained paperbacks and torn covers, now possessed a collection that the New York Public Library would envy. The woman, the terrified mouse in the bear's den, was sick. This was his real answer to my note. It was a bribe. It was a taunt. It was a joke. I'd complained about his noise, so he'd responded by donating the quietest, most valuable things he could. He was showing me, in no uncertain terms, the scale of his power. He was telling me that his loud world of crime and violence was the very thing that could give me this priceless, silent beauty. I picked up the Anna Karenina, my namesake. I opened the cover. There was no library card, no property of stamp. Just a small, elegant note, on the same thick, creamy cardstock as his ownership reply, tucked inside. For the new Russian literature wing. A. I sank down onto the floor, the priceless stolen book in my lap. My heart was hammering, but it wasn't just fear. It was a toxic, sizzling cocktail of terror, fury, and a terrible, dreadful fascination. He hadn't just ignored my note. He'd answered it. The War of Wills had begun, and he had just fired a cannon. I was left holding a beautiful, priceless piece of shrapnel, and I had no idea what to do next.
Chapter 4. Aleksandr. The world, in my experience, is divided into two parts. The one I control, and the one I have not yet brought to heel. My new office, formerly Anna's closet of coffee-stained mugs and sentimental paperbacks, was a temporary foothold in the latter. It was too small. The ceiling was too low. The air, despite my men's best efforts, still smelled faintly of her, that vanilla and paper scent, diluted now by the sharp, sterile smell of the new secure line communications console we'd installed. It was a tactical compromise. I detested it. But the anonymity of the location was perfect. I was in the middle of a high-stakes, deeply unsatisfying video conference. On the main monitor, the face of Maxim, my polkovnik in Brighton Beach, was grim. The retaliation was clean, Pakhan, Maxim was saying, his voice tinny through the speaker. The warehouses in Red Hook are ash. Vasquez lost his entire shipment and his primary distribution hub. But, I pressed, leaning back in the cheap chair. It groaned under my weight. I would have it replaced by tomorrow. But he is not a rat hiding. He is a snake. He is angry. He's putting word out on the street. He knows it was us. He's asking about you, boss. Your new movements. Your new interests. My eyes flickered from Maxim's face to the second smaller monitor on my desk. It was a high-definition, 4-quadrant split of the library's security feed. I'd had it installed the day after I took ownership. For security, I'd told Dmitri. A necessary precaution for our new headquarters. It was not a lie, but it was not the entire truth. My gaze settled on Quadrant 2, the main circulation desk. She was there. My Shinnok. I was watching her. I'd been watching her for a week, in the stolen moments between running my war. I'd watched her meticulously reshelve books, her small hands impossibly gentle. I'd watched her interact with the old woman, Mrs. Petrov, a soft, genuine smile touching her lips. I'd watched her scrub a smudge of grime off the checkout counter with a ferocious, focused intensity. She was a creature of absolute, meticulous order. She was a living antithesis to the chaos I embodied, and she was, at this moment, intensely annoyed. I could see it in the rigid line of her spine, the sharp, angry way she was stamping a stack of books. She was still furious about the donation. I had not been prepared for her reaction to the books. I had expected, I didn't know what. Fear, awe, perhaps a grudging gratitude. Instead, I had received fury. When she had returned to her desk after discovering the crate, I'd watched on this very monitor as she'd slammed her stamp down with enough force to crack the wood. It was the same fire I'd seen the first night, that suicidal, magnificent defiance. She knew they were stolen. She knew they were a taunt, and she hated me for it. It was the most invigorating thing that had happened to me all year. Aleksandr? Maxim's voice pulled me back. He can ask all he wants, I said, my eyes still on Anna. Let the snake hiss. He's been defanged. He won't. My words cut off. My entire body went still. A new figure had entered the library. Not one of my men. Not one of her usual shuffling patrons. This man was soft. He was in his late 20s, with a weak chin, a cheap blazer, and hair that was trying too hard to look artfully messy. He moved with a lazy, unearned confidence, a smirk on his lips. He was a weasel, a rat. He looked at the priceless first edition War and Peace on the display table I'd had my men set up, and his eyes showed no interest. He was blind to its value. He was looking for her. My fingers, of their own accord, moved to the console and muted Maxim's voice. The polkovnik continued to speak, his face moving silently on the main screen, but my world had shrunk to Quadrant 2. The weasel sauntered up to her desk. Her desk. My desk. He leaned on it, a casual, proprietary gesture that made my jaw tighten. He was too close, invading her space. I watched her body language shift. She recoiled, her spine going from angry rigid to uncomfortable rigid. She was polite. That professional management mask was on. But she was leaning away, a bird trying to escape a cat. The weasel laughed. He was trying to charm her. He put his hand on the desk, near hers. She pulled her hand back. He was not a threat. He was vermin, and he was touching my property. Boss? Maxim's silent face was now staring, waiting. I watched, my blood cooling, my focus sharpening to a razor's point. The weasel's smile faded. He said something, his tone clearly shifting. He was no longer trying to charm, he was demanding. He was used to getting his way with her. An example. I knew it instantly. Only an ex, a failed man, would carry this specific, wounded, arrogant energy. He reached out. He didn't just tap her arm, he grabbed her. His hand, soft and pale, closed around her forearm. On the screen, I saw her flinch. I saw her try to pull away, but his grip tightened. I saw red. It was not the hot, expansive rage I felt for Vasquez. That was business. That was war. This was different. This was a cold, black, killing rage. It was the instinctive, territorial fury of the bear whose den has been invaded. I unmuted my mic. Maxim flinched at the sudden noise. "Something requires my personal attention," I said, my voice a low, flat calm. Maxim, who had known me for a decade, went pale. He knew that tone. It was the tone I used just before I had men thrown from rooftops. "Da, Pakhan, I understand." I cut the feed. I stood up. The cheap chair shrieked in protest and scraped against the floor. I did not bother to straighten my suit. I opened my office door. The click of the latch was unnaturally loud in the quiet library. Dmitri and Kirill, my two men on duty in the main room, were on their feet before I had even cleared the threshold. They had been sitting, pretending to read newspapers, but their eyes were always moving. They saw my face. They saw my hands, fisted at my sides. They both reached inside their jackets. "Boss?" Dmitri asked, his voice low. "Vasquez." "No," I said, my voice a low growl. I jerked my chin toward the circulation desk. "Vermin." I did not run. I walked. Every footstep on the linoleum was a deliberate, measured promise of violence. The weasel had his back to me, still focused on Anna, his voice rising in a pathetic, wheedling whine. "Just asking for what you owe me, Anna. You can't just ignore me." Anna saw me first. Her eyes, which had been full of angry frustration for the weasel, snapped up and met mine. The color drained from her face. Her defiance, her anger, all of it was instantly consumed by a new, more profound emotion. Sheer, unadulterated terror. She wasn't looking at a savior. She was looking at a monster. The weasel, sensing her sudden terror, turned. His smug, greasy face crumpled in confusion. "What? Who the hell are you?" I didn't stop until I was standing directly in front of him, close enough to smell the cheap beer on his breath. I was a full foot taller and 100 pounds of muscle heavier. I was the mountain, and he was the idiot who had tried to build a house in my shadow. I looked down at his pale, soft hand, still gripping my librarian's arm. "Get your hand off her." My voice was quiet. It was not a request. It was a statement of what would happen next. The weasel, emboldened by that particular brand of stupidity that only weak men possess, scoffed. He actually tightened his grip on Anna. "Excuse me, I'm talking to my girlfriend. Butt out, buddy." Anna whimpered. "Greg, please. Let go. Just go." "Not until we—" I didn't hit him. Hitting him would be messy. Hitting him would be a fight. This was not a fight. This was an extermination. I moved faster than he could blink. I didn't touch him. I reached out, my large hand enveloping Anna's small, trembling one, which was fisted on the desk. But my eyes, my cold, flat, dead eyes, never left his. I leaned in, invading his space, just as he had invaded hers. I lowered my voice to a whisper, a sound that would not carry. a sound meant only for him and for the grave. She is Moya. Mine. His smugness faltered. The reality of who I was, of what I was, began to dawn in his stupid, watery eyes. She belongs to me, I whispered, the Russian in my accent thickening, the predator letting its teeth show. You are touching what is mine. You are breathing my air, and I am a very territorial man. I smiled. It was the smile I saved for men I was about to kill. So I will give you one chance. You will release her. You will turn around, and you will walk out of this library. And if you ever, in your short, pathetic life, even think her name again, I will not just kill you. I will unmake you. I will dig up your family. I will burn your past. You will vanish, and the only person who will know why is me. And even I will forget your name by morning. Do you understand? I let go of Anna's hand, and very gently placed my thumb on his wrist, right over his pulse. It was rabbit fast. I applied just an ounce of pressure. His eyes widened. The bravado didn't just crack, it shattered. He let go of Anna as if she were on fire. I'm sorry. I didn't know. He stammered, scrambling backward. Go, I commanded, my voice still a whisper. He went. He didn't just walk. He turned and fled, tripping over his own feet, nearly colliding with the new fiction display. He slammed his way through the front doors and disappeared onto the street. The library was plunged back into a profound, vibrating silence. My men, Dmitri and Kirill, were back in their seats, their newspapers raised. They had seen nothing. They always saw nothing. The monster, the Pakhan, was still buzzing under my skin, high on the kill that wasn't, on the absolute satisfying control. Then I turned, and the buzz died. Anna was still pressed against the back counter, her hands flat on the desk, her entire body shaking. She was white as a sheet, her eyes fixed on me. It was the same look from the first night, but worse. It was not the defiant, angry fire I enjoyed. It was not the terrified awe of a mouse seeing a bear. It was the cold, horrified, repulsed look of a woman staring at a murderer. She had seen the truth. She had seen me. And I, for the first time in my life, hated it. I didn't know what I wanted. To touch her, to soothe her, to erase the last 5 minutes. The confusion was a physical, uncomfortable thing, a dissonance in my chest. But I was the Pakhan. I did not soothe. I did not comfort. I owned. I straightened my suit jacket, pulling the owner back around me like armor. The monster went back in its cage. He will not bother you again, I said, my voice gruff. She didn't answer. She just stared, her chest heaving, those green-gold eyes wide with a new, deeper terror. I found myself frustrated. She had looked at the weasel with anger. She looked at me with horror. I had solved her problem, and she looked at me like I was the problem. Back to work, Mishinok, I said, the words harsher than I intended. I turned my back on her trembling, on her terrified, accusing stare, and walked back to my office. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding the final, definitive note of my victory. But as I sat down in front of my console, the silence of the library pressing in, I did not feel victorious. I felt empty. I had won the battle. I had protected my territory. But as I looked at the security feed, at the small, shaking woman who refused to even look toward my door, I had the distinct, infuriating feeling that I was losing the war.
Chapter 5. Anna. For 3 days, I lived inside a ghost. Greg was gone. He wasn't just gone as in staying away. He was gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. His usually obnoxious, oversharing social media had gone dark. He'd missed 2 shifts at the bar he worked at, a fact I learned from his frantic manager, who had called the library looking for him, his voice laced with annoyance. "You were his last call, Anna," the manager had snapped, as if I were somehow responsible. "He said he was coming to see you. Now he's MIA. He does this. He's fired." I had mumbled something non-committal, my hand so cold I could barely hold the receiver. I didn't mourn Greg. Our relationship, if it could even be called that, had been a lukewarm 2-month mistake fueled by my own loneliness and his casual, leech-like opportunism. I didn't miss him. But I was haunted by the ease of his disappearance. Aleksandr Volkov had unmade him with a whisper. He hadn't laid a hand on him. He hadn't raised his voice. He had simply erased him with a few cold, possessive words. "She is Moya. Mine." I was living in a state of suspended shock. The terror I'd felt on the first night, the terror of his loudness, was a child's fear of a thunderstorm. This new terror was different. It was the cold, adult fear of a black hole. It was the horror of realizing the monster wasn't just loud, it was absolute. He had saved me from Greg, but it hadn't felt like a rescue. It had felt like a branding. I had become, in a way, a ghost myself. I changed my hours. I started coming in at noon and working until 9, long after Aleksandr and his parade of granite-faced men had concluded their business and left for the day. My new strategy was simple: avoidance. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to be seen. The library was my sanctuary, but now it was a haunted one, and I was the ghost. Flitting between the shelves, my shoes silent. The only time I felt a spark of my old self was when I was cataloging his donation. My blood books, I'd started calling them. In my head, I worked on them every night, after I'd locked the doors, alone in the vast, silent building. My relationship with them was a toxic, confusing sickness. I hated what they represented. I knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that these priceless first-edition classics were the spoils of some terrible, violent conquest. They were stained. And yet, my God, they were beautiful. My librarian's soul, the part of me that had chosen this quiet life, was in thrall. To run my fingers over the hand-tooled leather of the Pushkin volumes, to smell the rich vellum paper of the Anna Karenina, it was an agony of delight. I was a nun forced to catalog the beautiful, glittering wages of sin. I hated him for bringing them here. I hated him for tainting my library with them. And I hated, with a hot, secret shame, the part of me that was grateful. This was my new routine. I would lock the doors at 9 p.m., turn off half the lights to save on the endowment's electric bill, and sit at the main desk, the single green-shaded lamp illuminating my work. It was just me and the blood books. Until tonight. It was almost 10:30 p.m. I was cross-referencing the Dostoevsky, my mind lost in the complex beauty of Cyrillic script, when I heard it. A sound. It was not a creak of the old building settling. It was not the groan of the radiators. It was a thud, a heavy, frustrated human sound. My heart didn't just jump, it stopped. It ceased to beat for one long, cold second before restarting at a frantic, suffocating pace. I wasn't alone. My first thought. Vasquez, the rival cartel from the graffiti, the men he'd been fighting, they'd come back just as he'd warned. My second thought, which was infinitely more terrifying. Him. The sound hadn't come from his office. His office was dark. I'd checked. It had come from the children's section. A cold sweat broke out over my entire body. I slid off my stool, my feet making no sound on the linoleum. My hands were shaking. I was a mouse, and the bear was still in the den. Had he been here all night, hiding, watching me? I heard it again. A low, frustrated growl like an animal, and then a word. Yellow, yellow, jolty. It was his voice, that deep, gravelly baritone, thick with an accent, but it was wrong. It wasn't the cold, confident rumble of the Pakhan. It was low, frustrated, and clumsy. My terror was instantly, bizarrely eclipsed by a profound, paralyzing confusion. I crept from behind the desk, my body moving in a low crouch. I used the young adult fiction shelf as cover, my fingers tracing the spines of fantasy novels as I moved. The children's section was around the corner, past the picture books. I held my breath, my ears straining. The man with the yellow hat. He sounded out, the words broken. I heard the slap of a page being turned too hard. Was a good little. He stopped. A long silence. Then a low, furious string of Russian I couldn't understand, ending with a sharp, "Chert возьми!" Damn it! My mind could not process what I was hearing. I reached the edge of the shelving. I peered around the spine of the giver, and the world tilted. He was there. Aleksandr Volkov, the bear, the Pakhan, the monster who had unmade Greg with a look. He was sitting on a tiny, primary yellow plastic stool. He was so enormous that the stool was completely invisible beneath his thighs, making it look as if he were squatting uncomfortably close to the floor. His knees were jackknifed up by his ears. His bespoke suit jacket was off, slung over the miniature reading rocket bookshelf. But he was still in his crisp white shirt. The sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms covered in a dense, swirling tapestry of black ink. And in his massive, tattooed killer's hands, he was holding a bright, floppy, dog-eared copy of Curious George. He was staring at the page with an intensity of pure, murderous frustration. He was not the Pakhan. He was not the owner. He was a man locked in a mortal battle with a children's book. And he was losing. I stood there, frozen, for how long, I don't know. I just watched. I watched the man who commanded an army of killers, who had bought my life with pocket change, struggle to sound out the word bicycle. He growled again, that same frustrated sound, and I saw his shoulders tense. He was embarrassed. Not dangerous. Not angry. Just embarrassed. He slammed the book shut. The whump of the children's book closing was as loud as a gunshot in the silence. His head snapped up. Our eyes met across the brightly colored carpet. The monster was back. Instantly. His body went rigid, the frustration vaporized, replaced by that cold, glacial stillness I'd seen in the history section. His eyes turned to chips of ice. He was livid. He was mortified. He was a king caught in his nightclothes. "What are you doing here?" His voice was a low, deadly growl. He didn't uncurl himself from the tiny stool. He just loomed, a predator tensed to strike. My throat closed. The fear came rushing back, a cold tide. I'm working. Late. I'm cataloging the donation. His eyes narrowed. He knew what I meant by donation. He knew I was accusing him. "You are paid to work from 9 to 5, he said, his voice flat. "You and your men are here from 9 to 5. I shot back, the words out of my mouth before I could stop them. It's distracting." A dangerous silence. He stared at me. I stared at him. He was a bear on a bright yellow mushroom, and I was the fool who had wandered into the clearing. "Leave," he commanded. "I should have." I should have run. I should have grabbed my bag and fled into the night. Greg's face flashed in my mind, his panicked, stammering retreat. But I was not Greg. And this was not his office. This was my children's section. He was the one out of place, not me. And he was holding Curious George. The librarian in me, that stubborn, foolish, instinctive part of my soul, took one tiny, trembling step forward. "You're mispronouncing curious," I said. His entire body tensed. I thought, for 1 second, he was going to throw the book at my head. What? My heart was a hummingbird. You're stressing the O sound. It's curious, not coriaus. And yellow isn't... It's not yellow. It's one sound. Yellow. He stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. I had caught him in his one, true, undeniable moment of vulnerability. In his world of violence and power, he was a god. In my world of words and syntax, he was a child. For the first time since I'd met him, Aleksandr Volkov looked uncertain. He slowly, deliberately, put the book down on the tiny table next to him. "My reading," he said, his voice a low, defensive rumble, "is functional. I read contracts. I read numbers." "But you can't read Curious George," I whispered. His eyes flashed, the ice returning. "I learned to fight, my Shinnok. I learned to count money. I learned to break men. I did not waste time on this." He gestured to the book with pure contempt. "It's not a waste," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of its strength. I was impossibly on my own territory. This I knew. It's fundamental. He looked at the book. He looked at me. He was the Pakhan, and he had been caught. He could kill me for this. He could erase me just like Greg. Or... You're teaching yourself?" I asked, my voice softer. "I am... improving," he bit out, the admission clearly tasting like ash. I don't know what possessed me. It wasn't kindness, it wasn't pity, it was... I don't know. It was the sight of this absolute terrifying man, humbled by a children's book. It was the librarian's instinct. It was the mouse. Realizing the bear had a thorn in its paw. "You're doing it wrong," I said. His head snapped up, the rage returning. "I am. You're trying to memorize the shapes. You're not sounding out the phonetics. Your accent... The Russian phonetics are getting in the way." I took another step. I was 5 feet from him now. The air between us was electric, a buzzing, high-tension wire. I can help you." He went utterly still. "You," he said, the word dripping with disbelief. "Teach me?" "I am a librarian," I said, lifting my chin, my body still shaking. "That's what I do. I teach people how to read. If you want to learn." He stared at me for a long, agonizing, silent minute. He was weighing it. His pride, his embarrassment, his need. He was a serious person, as Mrs. Petrov had said, and he had found a flaw in his armor. And I was the only one who had seen it. He could kill me to protect his secret. Or he could use me to fix it. He gave a single, sharp, reluctant nod. "Korosho? Fine." My breath escaped in a shaky whoosh. Okay, well, sit up. Your posture is terrible. You're hovering." He looked at me, incredulous, but I was already in management mode. This was my library. "And we're not starting with Curious George," I said, walking past him. I walked past him, to the early reader's shelf. The air around him was hot, a furnace of coiled energy. I could feel his eyes on my back. "The vocabulary is too erratic. We're starting with biscuit." I pulled the thin, simple book from the shelf. I turned around. He was still on the tiny stool, watching me, his face an unreadable, guarded mask. But the killing intent was gone, replaced by a sullen, wary, frustrated obedience. I walked back. I didn't sit on a stool. I sank down, cross-legged, onto the brightly colored alphabet rug. I kept a safe distance, but in the small, intimate space of the children's section, safe was still only 3 feet. "Here," I said, holding out the book. He looked from the book to my face. The tension was a living thing. It was a wire, pulled taut between us, humming with a frequency of pure, undiluted danger and this new, bizarre, terrifying intimacy. He took the book. His massive, tattooed fingers dwarfed the small, square cover. "Open it," I said, my voice trembling, but firm, "and read. To me."
Chapter 6. Aleksandr, a week. For 1 week, I had lived a dual life. It was a lie. From 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., I was the Pakhan. I sat in her cramped, vanilla-scented former office, which my men had reinforced with a steel door and shatterproof glass. I ran my war. I took reports from Maxim. I tracked Vasquez's movements. I diverted shipments. I laundered money. And I ordered, with cold precision, the strategic breaking of men. I was Aleksandr Volkov, the bear, a man who commanded, who took, who owned. And then, at 10:30 p.m., I became a fool. I became a fool, sitting on a tiny, humiliatingly small plastic stool, while a 26-year-old librarian with fire in her green-gold eyes taught me how to read. This nightly ritual was a sickness. It was an addiction. It was the only thing I thought about. The war with Vasquez, the millions in product, the lives of my men, all of it had faded, becoming a gray, mechanical backdrop to these stolen hours. I would sit in my steel-plated office, staring at the security feed, not at the doors, but at her. I would watch her work. Her movements so small, so precise. I would wait, my muscles coiled, my patience thinned to a razor's edge, for the clock to hit 9 p.m. I would watch her lock the doors. I would watch her turn off the main lights. I would watch her settle under her single green lamp. And then I would wait. I would wait until I was sure the entire city was asleep, until the world outside had gone silent. Then I would emerge. I would walk from my office, the Pakhan, and I would sit on that plastic stool in the children's section, and I would become the student. I hated it. I am a man who has never been bad at anything. At 12, I could break down and reassemble a Kalashnikov in the dark. At 18, I could run a numbers racket that baffled men twice my age. At 25, I took my father's broken, fractured Bratva and forged it into an empire. I did not fail. Until Frog and Toad. "No," she said, her voice patient. And it was the patience that was killing me. It was 11 p.m. We were on the alphabet rug. She was cross-legged, a book open in her lap. I was on my ridiculous stool, leaning forward, my forearms on my knees, glaring at the book in my own hands. We had graduated from Biscuit to Frog and Toad are friends. It was, I had decided, a story about 2 codependent, delusional amphibians. "Read it again," she commanded, her voice soft. I read it, I growled, my frustration a physical burning heat in my chest. "You read the words," she corrected, not looking up. "You didn't read the sentence. You said, 'Frog shivered. A big drop of water fell.' You're reading it like an inventory list. It's a story. It's supposed to flow." Frog shivered. A big drop of water fell. I hated the way she said it. Her voice was smooth, the English words flowing from her mouth like water. When I spoke, it felt like I was chewing rocks. "This is stupid," I said, my voice low. "It's not," she replied, her calm infuriating. "You're just not used to being bad at something. Your pride is getting in the way." My head snapped up. "My pride? You know nothing. I know that you're pronouncing shivered like it has 3 syllables because you're angry at the book," she said, finally looking at me. Her eyes, in the low, intimate light of the children's section, were not the terrified mouse eyes I was used to. They were the cool, analytical eyes of management. "You're not a student. You're a patient, and I'm a surgeon, and you're fighting me as I'm trying to fix you. Now, read it again, from Frog was in his garden." My jaw ached. I wanted to break something. I wanted to throw this stupid book across the room. I wanted to. I looked back down at the page, and I read. Frog was not in his garden. Toad came walking by. It was humiliating, but the frustration, the real burning, agonizing frustration, it wasn't the book. It wasn't the amphibians. It was her. It was her proximity. She was 3 feet away. It was an agonizing, impossible distance. It was her smell. That clean, sharp, maddening scent of old paper and vanilla. It had seeped into my office, and now, here, it was suffocating. It was pure. It was the opposite of my world, and I was desperate to breathe it in. I was desperate to taint it. It was the way she sat, her posture perfect, her small, pale hands resting on the book in her lap. It was the way the single overhead light, which she'd left on for us, caught the halo of frizzy hair around her bun. It was the way I could see the faint blue vein on the inside of her wrist. It was her mouth. I had become obsessed with her mouth. I watched it as she formed the words for me. Shivered. Together. I watched the way her lips, which were pale and unpainted and looked impossibly soft, pressed together to make an M sound, the way her top teeth would graze her bottom lip for an F. I was in a state of constant, agonizing, high-voltage arousal. I was a starving man being forced to sit 3 feet from a banquet, and I was being taught how to use a fork. "Okay," she said, closing her book. "That's enough for tonight. You're getting angry, and when you get angry, you stop learning." "I am not angry," I snapped, perhaps too quickly. "Yes, you are." She started to gather her things, and a sudden sharp panic seized me. Number. Not yet. She was leaving. I didn't know how to make her stay. I, who could command armies, had no idea how to say, "Don't go." So I defaulted to what I knew. Arrogance. "This is inefficient," I said, gesturing to the books. "I should be reading contracts. The Financial Times." She stood up, a graceful, fluid motion. She looked down at me, still perched on my tiny stool. "You can't read the Wall Street Journal until you can read Frog and Toad, Aleksandr. You can't build a house without a foundation. You're just a man who is used to seizing things. You can't seize this. You have to learn it." She was right. And that, more than anything, was the final straw. "This!" I snarled, standing up. The stool clattered to the floor, forgotten. I was the bear again, looming, casting her in my shadow. The intimate, quiet spell of the lesson was broken, shattered by my sudden movement. I felt the Pakhan rush back, the cold, impatient anger. This is useless. I slammed the Frog and Toad book shut. The whump of the small book was a gunshot in the silent library. Anna flinched. Her eyes widened. The teacher was gone. The mouse was back. She was looking up at me, her chest rising and falling in a quick, shallow rhythm. She was seeing the monster again, the man who had erased her ex-boyfriend. I wanted her to be afraid. It was a familiar, comfortable dynamic. I understood her fear. What I did not understand was what she did next. She should have backed away. She should have run. Instead, her eyes, wide and terrified, flickered from my face, to the book I was crushing in my fist, and back to my face. She saw the rage. She saw the pure, undiluted frustration. And acting on an instinct so pure and suicidal it defied all logic, she reached out. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay to be frustrated." Her hand, her small, pale librarian's hand, landed on my forearm. The world stopped. It was not a touch. It was a brand. It was a jolt of pure, white-hot electricity. It was fire on my skin. My entire nervous system, coiled and on edge from an hour of her proximity, detonated. My breathing stopped. My heart, which I rarely ever noticed, slammed against my ribs. I looked down. Her small hand, on my skin. Her fingers were spread, resting on the black ink of my Bratva tattoos. It was a collision of worlds, her pale, soft skin against the hard, coded history of my violence. The contrast was so stark, so wrong, that it was the only right thing in the entire world. All the rage, at the book, at Vasquez, at myself, evaporated. It left a vacuum. And in that vacuum, there was only one primal, undeniable thing. I moved. It was not a thought. It was an instinct. Before she could pull back, before she could process her mistake, I reacted. I didn't pull away. I captured. My free hand shot out and closed over hers, trapping it against my arm. She gasped, her eyes flying wide. She felt it. My hand dwarfed hers. My fingers wrapped completely around her wrist, my thumb pressing against the frantic bird-wing pulse at its center. I could feel the life in her, the heat. "Aleksandr," she breathed, her voice a terrified whisper. It was not a protest. It was a question. I didn't answer. I pulled. It was not a gentle tug. It was a summons. She stumbled forward, pulled off balance, and collided with my chest. Her other hand came up, pushing against my shirt, a pathetic, useless barrier. She was so small. She was so warm, I was drowning in her scent, that clean vanilla and paper, a scent that I suddenly knew would haunt my sleep for the rest of my life. I was no longer the student. I was no longer the Pakhan. I was just a man who was starving. I let Frog and Toad fall from my other hand. It hit the alphabet rug without a sound. I used that hand to cup her jaw. My thumb stroked, just once, across the sharp, delicate line of her bone. She was trembling. Her entire body was a vibration. "You have no idea," I whispered, my voice thick, unrecognizable. "What you do to me, my Shinnok." I leaned in. She wasn't running. She was frozen. Her eyes were fixed on my mouth. Her lips parted just a fraction. I was millimeters away. I could feel her breath, warm and sweet, on my lips. I could see the gold flecks in her eyes, wide and luminous with a terrifying, undeniable anticipation. I was going to kiss her. I was going to taste her. I was going to take... Bang! The sound was a sacrilege. It was the sound of the reinforced front doors of the library being slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. It was an explosion in our silent, sacred space. "Boss! Pakhan!" Dimitri's voice. It was not his usual calm tone. It was raw. It was panic. The moment, the world, the universe, it shattered. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been thrown on me. The heat, the need, the fog of her scent. It was gone, ripped away. I dropped her hand as if it had burned me. I let go of her jaw. I took one sharp step back. Anna stumbled, her hand flying to her mouth. She was staring at me, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with the whiplash of the moment. The ghost of the kiss was still on her lips, but I was already gone. I turned away from her, my back to her. The student was dead. The man was gone. The Pakhan was back. Dimitri ran into the children's section, his face pale, his gun visible in his shoulder holster. He skidded to a stop on the alphabet rug, his eyes darting from me to the terrified, trembling woman by the bookshelf. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. "Vasquez," I growled. It was not a question. "Da, Pakhan," Dimitri panted, his voice tight. "We have a problem." A big problem. They found something. They know. I turned, my eyes ice. I snatched my suit jacket from the reading rocket, shrugging it on, the familiar weight settling on my shoulders like armor. I was all cold edges and hard lines. "Where?" "The safe house. In Queens. They hid it, boss." I stalked past him. I did not look at Anna. I couldn't look at her. If I looked at her, I would stay. If I looked at her, I would pull her against me and I would not let go. "Kirill, in the car." "It's bad, boss." I was already at the edge of the children's section. I paused, my back still to her. "Lock the door behind me," I commanded, my voice the flat, cold, dead voice of the owner. "Do not open it. For anyone." I didn't wait for a reply. I walked out, Dimitri on my heels, the sound of our shoes on the linoleum an echo of the first night. We left the smell of ozone and danger in our wake. I left her alone, in the wreckage of the moment, surrounded by children's books, her hand still pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with the terror of a kiss that never happened, and the promise of a war that just had.
Chapter 7. Anna. I did not sleep. Sleep was an impossibility, a distant country I could no longer visit. I had spent the night in my small, lonely apartment, sitting on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket, shaking. My skin was still on fire. I was a living, breathing, raw-nerved ghost of a moment that had never even happened. I could still feel him. I could feel the hard, calloused pads of his thumb on my jaw. I could feel the sheer, suffocating heat of his body as he pulled me against him. I could feel the brand of his hand on my forearm. I had scrubbed my skin in the shower until it was raw, but I couldn't wash the sensation away. It was an imprint, a stain. And the taste. I could still taste the kiss that never was. It was the metallic, ozone tang of his breath, the promise of an absolute, devastating possession. He had been going to kiss me. And I, Anna Petrova, the quiet, sensible, invisible librarian, I had been going to let him. I hadn't run. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't even flinched. I had been frozen, my lips parted, my body pliant against his. I had been, for one terrifying electric second, willing. That was the true horror. The self-disgust was a cold, bitter sickness in my stomach. I was horrified at the monster, but I was repulsed by myself. Then Dimitri's voice, raw with panic. Vasquez. The man, the student, the almost lover, the human I had, for one insane moment, seen, had vanished. He'd been replaced, in the blink of an eye, by the Pakhan. The monster had re-emerged, his eyes turning to ice, his armor of cold command locking back into place. He had dropped me as if I were nothing. He had walked away, into his world of violence and panic, and had thrown a command over his shoulder. Lock the door. I was a toy, a distraction, a lesson. And when his real world came calling, I was to be locked back in my box. I'd sat on the alphabet rug for an hour, shaking, before I'd finally found the strength to crawl to my feet, to lock the doors, to flee into the night. My entire world shattered. Now it was 7 a.m. The sun was a weak gray smear behind the November clouds. I was standing in front of the library, my keys in my trembling hand. I was running on nothing but caffeine and a cold, toxic cocktail of shame and dread. I was early. I knew he wouldn't be here. He and his men were out, fighting their war. I needed my sanctuary. I needed to be in the one place that had ever felt safe, even if it was a lie. I needed to put things in order. I needed to shelve books and wipe counters and pretend that last night had never happened. My key slid into the lock. The click of the deadbolt was a sharp, ugly sound in the morning silence. I pushed the heavy door open. And the lie was gone. The smell hit me first. It was not my library. It did not smell of old paper and lemon polish and floor wax. It smelled wrong. It smelled acrid, chemical, and sharp. It was the smell of a garage, of a factory. It was the smell of paint. "No," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. I fumbled for the light switch. My fingers found the bank of switches and I slammed them all on. The fluorescent lights flickered, hummed, and then buzzed to life, illuminating a scene of such profound, wanton violation that my legs gave out. I didn't fall, but I staggered, my hand gripping the doorframe to hold myself up. My sanctuary was gone. It was not just messy. It was not just disturbed. It was desecrated. They had come in through the windows, the high, arched windows that I had always loved. The glass was shattered, littering the modern fiction section with a glittering spray of death. Cold, damp air was pouring into the building. Shelves were overturned, entire sections, biography, history, my sections, had been toppled, their contents spilled across the floor like the entrails of a slaughtered animal. Books were everywhere, a sea of paper. But they weren't just spilled. They were destroyed. I took one stumbling step inside. The sole of my shoe crunched on the broken glass. They had been torn, ripped. Pages were shredded, spines were broken, covers were bent in half. My blood books, the priceless Russian collection I had spent the last week cataloging, were gone. The display table had been overturned. The books, stabbed. A knife had been taken to the leather covers, slashing them, gutting them. The Anna Karenina was lying in a puddle of muddy water from a plant they had smashed, its pages warped and bleeding ink. A sob, a raw, animal sound of pure grief, tore itself from my throat. "No, no, no, no." I was whispering it, a mantra, a prayer. I walked, as if in a trance, through the wreckage. I was a ghost in the graveyard of my own life. I passed the children's section. They hadn't spared it. The reading rocket was on its side. The picture books were scattered, their bright, innocent covers torn and stomped on. The two tiny plastic stools, my yellow one, his blue one, were shattered, as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to them. It was a message. a specific, personal message. They hadn't just hit his base. They had known what to hit. They had targeted the children's section. They had targeted my work. Then I saw the wall. The main wall, the one behind the circulation desk. My wall. It was covered in spray paint. Bright, dripping, blood red. The words were huge, spanning the entire length of the wall, painted with a furious, slashing anger. It was in Spanish. Sabemos donde duermes, oso. We know where you sleep, bear. My Spanish was minimal, learned from high school and patrons, but I didn't need to be fluent. I knew oso, bear. I knew with absolute chilling certainty what it meant. This was Vasquez. This was the war. And it had come home. They were telling him that nothing was safe. They were telling him that his new base, his new interest, was a vulnerability. He had brought this here. The man who had almost kissed me. The man who had struggled with Curious George. His world, his violence, his filth. It had bled into mine and it had poisoned everything. I sank to my knees right there in the aisle, surrounded by the guts of my books. I didn't have the strength to stand. I broke. I put my head in my hands and I wept. I wept for the books. I wept for the children. I wept for Mrs. Petrov. I wept for the loss of the only safe place I had ever known. I don't know how long I knelt there. Time had ceased to have meaning. I was startled by the sound of the front door. It didn't just open, it was thrown open, slamming against the wall with the same violence as the first night. Anna! It was his voice. Not the quiet student. Not the cold Pakhan. It was something new. It was raw. Urgent. Furious. I looked up, my vision blurred with tears. He was there. Aleksandr. He was framed in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the gray morning light. He was not alone. Dmitri and Kirill were fanned out behind him, their guns drawn, their eyes sweeping the room, clearing corners. He was in the same dark suit as last night, but his tie was gone, his collar open. He looked ragged. He hadn't slept. He looked like he had come straight from his war. His eyes, chips of ice, scanned the room, taking in the devastation in one, sweeping, comprehensive glance. He saw the shelves, he saw the glass, he saw the graffiti. His gaze locked on me. He saw me on my knees, a small, broken heap in the middle of his violated territory. I expected him to yell, to command, to ignore me. He did none of those. His face, which had been a mask of cold, hard fury, changed. The ice didn't just crack, it shattered. What replaced it was something so hot, so primal, so utterly terrifying it stopped my breath. It was a rage so profound, so black, so murderous, that it was no longer human. It was the pure, territorial fury of the bear itself. He didn't speak to me, he didn't move toward me. He walked, his steps measured and heavy, past the toppled shelves, past the gutted Russian novels. He walked straight to the wall, to the red graffiti. He looked at the words. Sabemos donde duermes, oso. He was utterly still. He just read the words, his head tilted. The air in the room became so heavy, so charged with his silent, vibrating rage, that I couldn't breathe. It was worse than any shouting. Dmitri, his gun now holstered, came up behind him. Pakhan, he said, his voice low. They must have hit it right after we left. A message. To prove they— Get out, Aleksandr whispered. Dmitri stopped. Boss? Get. Out Alexander's voice was a low, lethal vibration. Both of you, secure the perimeter. Get a cleanup crew, get contractors, get me everyone, and find out who did this. I don't want the soldier. I want the man who gave the order. I want his name. Yes, Pakhan. Dmitri and Kirill vanished, melting back out the front door, leaving us alone in the wreckage. Aleksandr stood there, staring at the wall, for a full minute. I was still on the floor, watching him, my tears drying, my body frozen. He slowly raised his hand, his tattooed fingers tracing the wet, red paint of the word Oso. Then, with a sound that was not a word, but a roar ripped from the deepest, most animalistic part of his soul, he punched the wall. It was not a human sound. It was not a human action. His fist, his massive, bare, tattooed fist, connected with the drywall right next to the graffiti. The crunch of plaster and wood splitting, the sheer explosive violence of it, made me scream. He didn't just hit the wall, he broke it. He left a crater, a gaping, shattered hole where his fist had been. He stood there, his chest heaving, his hand still buried in the wall he had destroyed. Blood. His blood, dark and red, dripped from his knuckles, mixing with the red spray paint. He was breathing like he'd just run a mile. He finally turned, his eyes finding mine. They were black. Pure, depthless black. "They will pay for this," he whispered, his voice a raw, gravelly promise of death. He wasn't speaking to me. He was making a vow to the world. He looked at the torn, priceless books. He looked at the shattered children's stools. He looked at me, his eyes landing on my tear-stained, terrified face. "They will pay," he repeated, his voice colder, "for touching what is mine." And I knew in that moment, with a terror that was colder and deeper than any I had ever felt, that he was not just talking about the library.
Chapter 8. Aleksandr. Plaster dust and splinters, that was the only sensation. A dull, grinding pain in my knuckles, a satisfying, fiery ache that radiated up my forearm. It was an anchor. It was the only thing that felt real. I pulled my fist from the crater I had made in the wall. Blood, dark and thick, welled from my split knuckles, dripping onto the floor, mixing with the muddy, ink-stained water and the glittering shards of glass. I looked at my hand. The pain was a distant, irrelevant thing. A gnat buzzing in the next room. The true, profound, all-consuming pain was the cold, black, silent ocean of rage in my chest. It was a pressure so immense I was surprised my ribs hadn't cracked. "Sabemos donde duermes, oso." Vasquez. That preening, cowardly, hissing snake. He thought this was a message. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was hitting a new, soft base of operations. He had no idea what he had done. He hadn't just vandalized a building. He hadn't just destroyed property. He had, with the casual, ignorant arrogance of a child pulling the legs off a spider, desecrated a sanctuary. Her word, not mine. But as I looked at the wreckage, at the gutted Russian novels, at the small, shattered plastic stools in the children's section, the word felt right. My gaze snapped to her. She was still on her knees, a small, broken thing, a pile of brown cardigan and frizzy hair, lost in the sea of my failure. She was weeping, her sobs the quiet, hopeless sounds of a person who had lost everything. And this was my fault. I had brought this. I had come into her quiet, orderly, vanilla-scented world, and I had, by my very presence, painted a target on it. My interest in this place, my fascination with her, had been noted, and in my world, any interest, any attachment, anything that is not violence, is a weakness. A lever. Vasquez thought he had found my lever. I turned away from her. I could not look at her. The sight of her tears I had caused, was a different kind of pain. It was a hot, sharp, guilty thing that I had no name for. I did not know how to fix it. So I focused on what I did know how to fix. I stalked to my office. The steel door was untouched, its lock secure. I slammed my bloody palm against the keypad, the numbers smearing red. The lock clicked open. Inside, my war room was pristine. My console, my monitors, my weapons, all safe, untouched. It was a fortress, but it was a fortress that had failed to protect the kingdom around it. I went into the small private bathroom I'd had installed. I turned on the tap, the water hissing. I thrust my bleeding hand under the cold stream, watching the water swirl pink and red down the drain. I felt nothing. Dmitri appeared at the doorway, his face pale, his phone in his hand. "Boss, cleanup crew is 20 minutes out. Contractors, an hour. They will board the windows first. I have..." He hesitated. "I have a name." I didn't turn. I grabbed a clean white towel and began to wrap it hard around my knuckles. The pressure was a good, sharp focus. "Who?" "The man who led the crew. One of Vasquez's top lieutenants. Calls himself Navaja, the Razor. He runs the local extortion rackets." "Navaja," I repeated. The name was ugly on my tongue. "Where is he?" "He's proud. He's celebrating. My contact says he's at a small taqueria in the Heights, bragging about how he..." Dimitri's voice faltered as he looked past me, at the wreckage outside the office. "How he re-educated the bear." "He is dead," I said, the words flat. I tied the towel in a savage, tight knot. "Boss, we should wait. Plan. It's his territory. He is dead. Now." I turned, my eyes finding his. Dmitri flinched. He saw the promise in my face. "Get Kirill. Get the car. I will do it myself. Aleksandr, this is..." "And get Maxim on the line." I am done. I am done playing. I strode to my console, my mind a cold, clear engine of war. Vasquez didn't just declare war, he declared obliteration. I hit the button on my secure line. Maxim's face appeared, grainy and tired. It was still night in Moscow. "Aleksandr?" "He hit the library," I said, my voice a low, lethal calm. "He hit her." Maxim, a man who had seen me gut men in back alleys, went utterly still. He had never heard this tone from me. "Give me the order, Pakhan," he whispered. "I want everything. I want the Vasquez cartel erased. Not just here, not just in Miami. I want his cousins, his suppliers, his grandmother in Sonora. I want his name pulled out, root and stem, from this earth. I want him to know that for this," I gestured to the wreckage, "for her I will burn continents. Is that clear?" "Da, Pakhan. It will be done." I was about to give the final order. I was about to unleash a firestorm that would make my retaliation for the docks look like a child's tantrum. "You!" My head snapped up. The office door was open, and she was standing in it. Anna, she was no longer crying. She was vibrating. She was covered in dust and grime, her face streaked with dried tears, but her eyes were blazing. It was not fear. It was not grief. It was the purest, most incandescent rage I had ever seen. It was the librarian fury of the first night, amplified into a supernova. "Dmitri," I said, holding up a hand to stop him from intercepting her. I cut the feed to Moscow. Maxim's face vanished. She stalked into my office, my fortress. She, who had been too terrified to even look at me, was marching into the lion's den. "You did this," she accused, her voice shaking but loud. She jabbed a trembling, dust-covered finger at my chest. You brought this here. This filth." Dmitri looked at me, his expression one of pure, disbelieving shock. No one spoke to me like this. No one lived after speaking to me like this. I just watched her. She was magnificent. She was a storm. She was the only thing in the world that felt more real than the rage in my chest. "This was a safe place," she screamed, her voice cracking. This was a home. For children. For old women. For people. It was quiet. And you came in with your noise and your war." She was right. Every word was a blade, twisting in my gut. This was my fault. I had failed to protect her. They stabbed the books. They broke the stools. They painted on the walls. You painted a target on us. She was crying again, but these were not tears of grief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated fury. "You have to stop," she begged, her hands fisting at her sides. "I don't care about your business. You have to stop. No more violence. Not here. This is my library, and I want you to go. Take your men, take your guns, take your blood books, and get out." She was heaving, breathless, her small body trembling with the force of her own words. The silence that followed was absolute. Dmitri had stopped breathing. I looked at her. I really looked at her. And I realized, in that one stark, devastating moment, what Vasquez had actually done. He hadn't just identified my weakness. He had given her a reason to leave me. He had given her a reason to tell me to go. And she had taken it. She was, at this moment, the bravest, strongest, most terrifying person I had ever met, and she was trying to cast me out. The thought of leaving, of her not being here, of this place being empty of her, it was not an option. It was an impossibility. It was like trying to imagine a world without air. My plan for retaliation, it wasn't enough. Killing Vasquez wouldn't fix this. Killing his entire family wouldn't make her stay. "I can't," I said, my voice a low, rough rasp. "Why not?" she sobbed. "Why won't you just leave us alone?" I stalked toward her. She was in my office, my territory. She flinched, but she held her ground. She didn't back down. I stopped, just inches from her. I was the mountain. She was the unmoving, defiant rock. "Because he's not wrong," I whispered. Her furious, tear-filled eyes stared up at me, confused. "What?" "Vasquez," I clarified, my voice deadly quiet. "He thinks you are my weakness. He thinks this place," I gestured to the library beyond the door, "is my new home. He thinks that by destroying it, he breaks me." "But he's wrong," she whispered, her voice desperate. "It's just a library." My gaze dropped from her eyes to her lips, those pale, soft, trembling lips that I had almost tasted last night. "No," I whispered, the admission torn from a place so deep inside me I didn't know it existed. "He's not." The confession hung in the air, a physical, undeniable thing. She was my weakness. This was my home. And the rage, the cold, black Pakhan rage I'd been channeling, suddenly, violently shifted. It didn't vanish. It focused. It transformed from a wide-burning fire of war into a single, white-hot, possessive point. The need from last night, the one interrupted by Dmitri, came roaring back, but it was no longer just desire. It was possession. It was a claim. It was a brand. It was my true answer to the graffiti on the wall. I did not ask. I did not wait. I was the bear, and this was my final territorial roar. "Aleksandr," she breathed, her eyes widening, seeing the shift, seeing the intent in my face. I closed the final inch. My wrapped, bloody hand slammed into the wall next to her head, the impact making her jump. The other hand plunged into her messy, frizzy hair, grabbing a fistful, tangling in the strands, tilting her head back, baring her throat, and my mouth crashed down on hers. It was not a kiss. It was a conquest. It was a collision. It was every ounce of my rage, my guilt, my primal, suffocating need to claim, all funneled into one desperate, brutal act. It was not gentle. It was not kind. It was violent, and it was mine. Her lips were soft, yielding, and they tasted of dust, salt tears, and that clean, impossible, addictive vanilla. She was salvation. She was the eye of my storm. She was the only thing. A small, broken sound, a half-sob, half-whimper died in her throat as I kissed her. I kissed her like I was trying to imprint my soul onto hers. I kissed her like I was trying to erase the violation of the library, the graffiti, the fear. I kissed her to silence her, to own her. Her small fists, clenched and trembling, came up and slammed once against my chest, a pathetic, useless resistance. And then they stopped. They didn't push. They clung, her fingers uncurled, fisting the material of my shirt. She wasn't fighting me. She was anchoring herself to me. I broke the kiss, tearing my mouth from hers. We were both panting, our breath mingling, hot and harsh in the small office. I didn't move. I kept her caged, my forehead pressed to hers, my bloody knuckles a guard by her head. Her eyes were wide, dazed, shattered. Her pupils were blown black. The green-gold irises just a thin, shocked ring. Her lips were red, swollen, and wet. She was well and truly shushed, and she was, well and truly, mine. I looked her dead in the eye. The Pakhan and the man, finally, terrifyingly, in agreement. "You are right," I whispered, my voice a raw, non-negotiable vow. "I brought this here, and now you are in it." I leaned in, my lips brushing hers, a promise of violence and possession. "You are Moya, mine, and I protect what is mine."
Chapter 9. Anna. My world was not spinning. It had simply entirely ceased. There was no thought. There was no air. There was only the stunned, ringing silence in my skull. A vacuum where the explosion had been. He was still caging me. My body was pressed against the cold, plaster-dusted wall of his office. His forehead was a brand against mine. His scent was all I could breathe, ozone, iron, his own unique, masculine smell. And now, overpoweringly, the sharp, coppery tang of his blood. His hand was still fisted in my hair, pulling, anchoring my head, holding me in place. The other, his wrapped, bloody fist, was still slammed into the wall by my ear, a testament to the violence he had just redirected. And his mouth. My lips were numb, swollen, and stinging. They felt conquered. They felt claimed. He had kissed me like he was trying to erase me and remake me, all in one brutal, possessive, desperate act. He had poured every ounce of his rage, his pride, and his terrifying, dark possession into me. It had not been a kiss. It had been a brand. The man I had screamed at, the monster I had tried to banish, had answered my fury by consuming it. And the most terrifying, sickening, shameful part of it all? My hands. My hands were not pushing him away. They were not flailing. They were fisted in the front of his expensive, rumpled shirt, clinging to him like he was the last solid thing in a world that had dissolved into chaos. I, Anna Petrova, had held on. In the face of that brutal, conquering kiss, some broken, terrified, primal part of me had held on. The realization was a new kind of horror. "Boss?" Dimitri's voice. The spell shattered. The shame came in a hot, acid-red wave. I tore my hands from Aleksandr's shirt as if it were on fire, shoving at his chest. The movement was useless. It was like pushing against a bank vault, but it was a start. He didn't move, not at first. His eyes, still black and depthless, held mine. He was still the predator, his breath still hot on my face. Then slowly, as if pulling himself back from a great distance, he let go of my hair. The strands catching on his fingers were a strange, intimate pain. He pulled his hand from the wall, leaving the bloody imprint of his knuckles. He straightened, putting an inch of space between us. It felt like a mile. I sagged against the wall, my legs shaking too badly to hold me. My lips burned. Aleksandr turned to Dimitri. The shift was instantaneous. The man who had just devoured me was gone. The Pakhan was back. His face was a cold, unreadable granite mask. He was all business. "Dimitri?" he said, his voice a flat, cold rumble. "Da, Pakhan?" Dimitri replied, his own face a perfect, impassive mask. He had seen it all. He had seen me scream at his boss, and he had seen his boss kiss me into silence, and he revealed nothing. "Find Navaha," Aleksandr commanded. "We know where he is," Dimitri said, a flicker of dark pride in his eyes. "The taqueria in the Heights." "Good." Aleksandr turned, not to me, but to the small private bathroom. He went to the sink and began to unwrap the bloody towel from his knuckles, his back to us. "Bring him here." My blood ran cold. Even Dimitri, the stoic shadow, faltered. "Here, Pakhan." "To the library?" He glanced at me just for a second, his expression unreadable. "The warehouse is secure. It is clean." "He did this here," Aleksandr said, his voice quiet, muffled by the sound of running water. He was rewrapping his hand with clean white gauze from a first aid kit. The movements were economical, precise. He broke her things. He brought his filth into her house. He turned, his hand now stark white, a clean medical-looking weapon. His eyes found mine. They were not the eyes of the possessive lover. They were the cold, dead eyes of the man who had erased Greg. He will answer for it here. It was a twisted, primitive, barbaric form of justice. He wasn't just protecting me. He was marking his territory, and he was going to make an example, right in the center of it. He was going to wash the blood of Vasquez's men, with more blood. "Go," he ordered Dimitri. Dimitri nodded once. "Da, Pakhan." He turned and was gone, a silent, obedient shadow. And I was alone. Again. With him. The silence in the office was deafening. I was still pressed against the wall. He was standing by the sink. He hadn't told me to go. "Anna," he said. I flinched. The sound of my name in his mouth now felt like a violation. "Go," he said, his voice gruff. "The cleanup crew is here. Oversee them." I stared at him. "Oversee?" "They are my men," he said, as if that explained everything. "They will board the windows. They will clean the glass. They will pack the books, tell them what to save, tell them what to throw away." He was dismissing me. I had been screamed at, cornered, claimed, kissed, and now I was being given a chore. The whiplash was so profound I felt dizzy. I stumbled out of the office, my legs robotic. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. The library was a hive. Men, not in suits, but in dark work clothes, were already moving with a silent, terrifying efficiency. They were not a cleanup crew. They were an army. They were boarding the shattered windows, plunging the library into a dim, artificial twilight. They were sweeping glass. They were erecting new temporary shelving. And they were packing my books. They were wrapping the torn, desecrated volumes in plastic, as if they were pieces of evidence. I walked through the dim, buzzing alien space that had once been my home. I was a ghost. I was numb. My lips were a constant physical reminder of what had happened. I kept touching them with my fingertips, half convinced I had dreamed it. But the swollen, tender skin was real. I found the Anna Karenina. It was lying on the floor where I'd left it, a sad, warped, muddy thing. I picked it up. The priceless stolen book. I tried to smooth its wet, bleeding pages. My body was on autopilot, but my mind was trapped. It was a looped reel playing over and over. The kiss. The rage. Mine. 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 He hadn't protected me. He had claimed me. He had answered an act of violence with an act of possession. He had seen the graffiti, "We know where you sleep," and he had, in essence, simply written his own name over it. She sleeps with me. I was a thing. A property. A new interest. I was the new Russian literature wing. I was something he had bought. Something he now had to protect. The shame I'd felt that morning, the shame of wanting him, of being intrigued, it was now a deep, profound self-loathing. I had let the darkness in. I had been fascinated by the bear, and I had been stupid enough to think he was just a man in a children's section. I worked for hours. The numbness was a mercy. I directed the men, my voice a hollow, robotic thing. Save that. It can be repaired. That one is gone. Bag it. The library was transformed. By late evening, it was no longer a library. It was a fortress. The windows were solid plywood. The doors were reinforced. The wreckage was gone, replaced by sterile order. The crews left. The library was plunged into a new, tomb-like silence. I was in the staff break room, my tiny corner behind the young adult stacks, trying to force myself to drink a cup of tea. My hands were shaking so badly the cup rattled in its saucer. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound, it was a thud. A heavy, wet sound, and it came from below. My heart, which had been beating in a low, dull, numb rhythm, stopped. The basement, the rare book archives, the place he had claimed for storage weeks ago, the day he'd arrived. I had never been down there. It was his. I heard it again. A low, muffled grunt of pain. My blood turned to ice water. Bring him here. Here. He was here. The man, Navaja, he was downstairs. My body moved. It was not a conscious decision. It was the same morbid, suicidal compulsion that had made me shush him, that had made me confront him. I had to see. I had to know. The numbness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, dreadful adrenaline. I crept from the break room. The main library floor was dark, lit only by a few emergency exit signs. The new raw plywood on the windows smelled like sawdust. I moved past the history section to the back of the library. The basement door was solid oak. It was always locked. Tonight, it was ajar. Just a crack. Maybe an inch. A sliver of single, sickly yellow light bled from the gap, painting a line on the dark linoleum. And with the light came the smell. It was not the sawdust. It was not the old paper. It was the smell from his office, from his hand. It was blood. I heard voices. Please, por favor. I was just following orders. A man's voice, guttural, sobbing in Spanish. Orders. Aleksandr's voice. It was not a roar. It was not the possessive, rough whisper from the kiss. It was calm. It was casual. It was the voice of a man discussing the weather. I understand orders, Navaja. So, tell me about the orders. Vasquez, he told you to hit this place. A library. Why? I was at the door. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I pressed my eye to the crack. I saw a staircase. And at the bottom, a room. It was not an archive. It was a concrete box. A single bare bulb hung from a wire, swinging, casting huge, grotesque shadows. A man was tied to a metal chair. His face was a ruin. He was the source of the blood. Dmitri was there, standing by the wall, impassive, his arms crossed. And Aleksandr. He was standing in front of the man. He had rolled up the sleeves of his white, pristine shirt. The new white gauze on his hand was a stark, clean contrast. He was wiping a small, dark blade on a cloth. He was working. He was not angry. He was not enraged. He was meticulous. He said, to make it personal. The man sobbed, his voice thick. He said you had an interest. Here. He said to break your new toy. A toy. Aleksandr mused. He sounded interested. He looked at the blade in his hand. And the children's stools? The little plastic ones? Was that an order too? No. I did that, the man whimpered. I thought it was funny. A bear. In a kid's place. Dios mío, por favor. Aleksandr nodded, as if this were a reasonable, clarifying answer. I see. Thank you. He moved, his body blocking my view of the man. It was a quick, fluid, economical motion. The man in the chair didn't scream. He shrieked. It was not a human sound. It was a noise of pure, animal, unadulterated agony that cut off into a wet, horrifying gurgle. I gagged. My hand flew to my mouth, but it was too late. The sound, a small, choked, wet hiccup of horror, was torn from my throat. In the room below, everything stopped. Aleksandr, his back still to the stairs, went utterly, profoundly still. He hadn't heard me. He had sensed me. He turned, slowly. He was not embarrassed, like he'd been in the children's section. He was not enraged, like he'd been at the graffiti. He was not possessive, like he'd been in the kiss. He was empty. He looked up, his cold, ice-blue eyes finding me in the crack of the doorway. He was a monster, caught in his lair, feeding. His face was calm, his hands bloody. He looked at me, and there was no apology in his gaze. There was no shame. There was no student or owner. There was only the Pakhan. He was looking at me, and his eyes said, "This is what I am. This is what it costs. This is the man you kissed." The kiss, the room spun, the self-loathing, the shame, the terror. It all coalesced into a single, blinding, white-hot point of betrayal. He had kissed me. He had touched my face, my hair, my mouth. He had branded me with his possession, with his protection, and he had done it with these hands. He had done it with this face. The man who had struggled with Biscuit was a lie, a mask, a trick. This was the truth. This was the man who had bought my library. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just broke. I turned. My body, which had been frozen in horror, was now filled with a frantic, icy, screaming adrenaline. I ran past the history section. I ran past the shrouded, plastic-wrapped shelves that were like bodies in a morgue. I ran past the boarded-up windows, past the ruins of my desk, past the red graffiti that was still a faint, ghostly stain on the wall. I ran to the newly reinforced front doors, fumbled with the complex new locks he had installed, tore the door open, and burst out into the cold, clean night air. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs were screaming. I ran, and I didn't look back. I just ran from the monster and from the horrifying, stupid, gullible part of myself that had, for one insane, unforgivable moment, been willing to let him in.
Chapter 10. Aleksandr. The sound was so small, I almost didn't hear it. A tiny, wet, choked gasp. It was not the sound of Navaha, who was long past coherent noise. It was not the sound of Dmitri, who was a stone wall. It was her. My back was to the stairs. My world narrowed to the man in the chair and the blade in my hand. But that single, tiny sound, it was a gunshot in the dead center of my focus. Everything stopped. The hot, satisfying work of justice, the cold, clear purpose, the world I had built to contain and punish the filth that had touched my library. All of it froze. I turned. Slowly. She was there, a sliver of her. A single, wide, green-gold eye, luminous with terror, staring at me through the crack in the door. She was not seeing the student. She was not seeing the owner. She was not even seeing the man who had kissed her, who had claimed her just hours before. She was seeing the Pakhan. She was seeing the truth. She was seeing the monster, with his hands bloody, in the center of his lair. And in her eyes, I saw her final fractured realization. The man who had kissed her was the same man holding the blade. There was no embarrassment. There was no rage. There was only a cold, dark, profound finality. The game was over. The masks were gone. I heard her run, the frantic, desperate slap, slap, slap of her sensible shoes on the linoleum floor above. She was a mouse, fleeing the trap. I heard the sound of her fumbling with the new deadbolts, my deadbolts, the ones I had installed to keep her safe. And then the crash of the heavy front door being thrown open. Then, silence. The empty, hollow silence of her absence. A strange, new, and deeply unwelcome sensation settled in my chest. It was not anger. It was not guilt. It was a cold, sharp, hollow feeling. It was the feeling of loss. Pakhan? Dmitri's voice was a low query. He too had heard. He was asking for an order. Do we pursue? I looked at the man in the chair. Navaha. He was gurgling, staring at me with a dawning, idiotic hope. He thought she was a witness. He thought her civilian horror would save him. He did not understand. Her horror was his death sentence. Dmitri, I said, my voice empty of all emotion. Da, Pakhan. Clean this up. I turned my back on Navaha. I did not need to see the end. I walked to the concrete sink in the corner of the room, the one we'd installed for this very purpose, and I began to wash my hands. I was meticulous. I was methodical. I scrubbed the blood from under my nails. I let her run. I let her have her head start. I let her feel the illusion of escape. Because I knew exactly where she was going. She had no one. She had nowhere. She had that small, drab apartment that smelled of her. She was a mouse, and she was running back to her own familiar, tiny, unsafe nest. And she was running, right now, with the name and face of Vasquez's primary target branded on her. The hollow feeling in my chest was replaced by the familiar, cold precision of the hunt. This was no longer a game of seduction, of lessons, of quiet fascination. This was a tactical retrieval of a high-value asset, an asset I had, through my own carelessness, compromised. I finished washing my hands. I dried them on a clean towel. My knuckles, under the fresh white gauze, throbbed with a dull, distant ache. "The car," I said to Dmitri, who was just finishing his work. "To her apartment?" Duh. The drive through the city was a blur. The rain had started again, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets. I stared out the window of the Maybach, my mind a cold calculator. She thought she was running from me, from the monster. She did not understand. She was running from the only man who could protect her to the monsters who wanted to gut her. Navaja had talked. Before the end, he had talked a lot. He had been so proud of his reconnaissance. He hadn't just vandalized the library. He and his men had watched it. They had watched us. They had seen her. They had seen me with her. They had seen her teach me. They had, I realized with a fresh, cold spike of rage, watched us through the windows of the children's section. They had seen everything, except the kiss. They knew who she was. They knew her schedule. They knew where she lived. She wasn't just a toy he'd broken to get at me. She was now, in the eyes of the Vasquez cartel, my paramour, my weakness, my lever. She was a dead woman, running. I didn't bother with the subtleties of knocking. Her apartment door was unlocked, just as I'd known it would be. She was in a panic, her brain flooded with adrenaline and horror, not logic. I stepped inside. The air was still. It smelled of her. Paper, vanilla, and her. I heard her. A frantic rustling from the bedroom. The sound of drawers being ripped open, of hangers scraping. I walked to the bedroom doorway. She was there. A duffel bag was on her bed, half full of clothes she was pulling, without looking, from her dresser. She was wearing a different sweater, but she was still covered in the dust and grime of the library. She was still my Anna, just broken. "Get out," she whispered, not even looking at me. She was throwing socks into the bag. "Get out." "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the small room, and she flinched, her entire body seizing. She finally spun around. Her face was a ruin. It was pale, streaked with tears and dirt, her eyes red-rimmed and wild. This was not the fire-filled rage from the office. This was the pure, frantic terror of a cornered animal. "I said, get out!" she shrieked. She grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy, hardcover book from her nightstand, and threw it at me. I caught it, my hand snagging it from the air, my eyes never leaving hers. It was Pride and Prejudice. Her own copy. "A monster," she sobbed, backing away until her legs hit the wall. You're a monster. A butcher. A filthy..." She couldn't find the words. She just shook her head, her whole body trembling. "Where will you go, Anna?" I asked, my voice still quiet. I took a step into the room. I dropped the book on her dresser. "Away!" she cried. "Away from you!" I'll go to the police. I'll tell them. I'll tell them what I saw. I'll tell them about Navaja." I took another step. I was in the center of the room now. I was the mountain, and her small, messy bedroom was my valley. "You will do no such thing," I said, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. "And you will not leave this room. You can't. You can't stop me." "Vasquez can," I said. The name hit her like a slap. She stopped trembling. She went utterly, profoundly still. "What?" "Vasquez," I repeated, closing the distance. I stopped 3 feet from her. "You think you are running from me? You are not. You are running to him. You are a lamb, covered in blood, running into a pack of wolves. I was close enough to see the confusion in her terrified eyes. Good. Let the fear of me be replaced by the logic of survival. Navaja talked, Anna, I whispered. His men. They watched you. They've been watching you for a week. They know this apartment. They know your schedule. They know you are the librarian who teaches the bear to read. The color, which I hadn't thought possible, drained further from her face. They think you are my lover. They think you are my property. I saw her flinch at the word, but I didn't care. She needed to hear this. You are no longer Anna Petrova, librarian. You are a target, a high-value one. The moment you walk out that door alone, you will not survive one day. You will not survive, perhaps, 1 hour. They will take you, and what they will do to you, to get to me. I let the sentence hang. I let her mind, her smart librarian's mind, fill in the blanks. I let her imagine what men like Navaja would do to the Pakhan's woman. Her eyes squeezed shut. A single silent tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. No, she whimpered. Yes, I was on her. I was caging her against the wall, just as I had in the office. Both my hands were on the wall, on either side of her head. I was her entire world. You saw the truth, my Shinnok. You wanted to see the monster. You found him. She was sobbing, her head bowed. The man in the children's section. Is me, I whispered, forcing her to look at me. I ducked my head, putting my face in front of hers. Listen to me. Listen. They are not two different people. The man who sat on that Chertova damned stool and read Frog and Toad. He is the same man who just put a blade in Navaja's throat. They are one and the same. She was shaking her head, denying it, denying me. The student you think you liked? I pressed, my voice a rough, desperate rasp. He is a luxury. The Pakhan, the monster. He is the one who pays for that luxury. He is the one who keeps you safe. He is the one who can. I took her chin, my fingers gentle but firm, forcing her to meet my gaze. Her eyes were a sea of shattered, terrified green. You can hate me, I said, my voice low, absolute and final. You can despise me. You can look at me and see nothing but the butcher in the basement. I do not care. You are never leaving me, because I am the only monster in this city who will not let the other monsters touch you. I let go of her. I stepped back. The non-negotiable, high-stakes truth was laid bare between us. Her or the wolves. You can pack, I said, gesturing to the duffel bag. You have 5 minutes. You are not going to a bus station. You are not going away. I turned, my back to her. You are coming home. With me, to my home. And you will not leave it again. Not without me. I was the Pakhan. I was the monster. And I was her only salvation. It was the reckoning. And I had won.
Chapter 11. Anna. I was a prisoner. But this was not a cell. It was a tomb. It was my library, and it was dead. The smell of old paper and vanilla was gone, smothered by the raw, green scent of new plywood and the metallic tang of dust. The windows, my beautiful, high-arched windows, were boarded shut eyes, plunging the main floor into a perpetual, suffocating twilight. The only light came from harsh, buzzing construction lamps set up by his men. For 2 days, I had lived in this fortress. My home was now the tiny, windowless staff break room. My bed was a cot. My guards were Dmitri and Kirill, who sat at the circulation desk, my desk, polishing weapons and speaking in low, guttural Russian. And he was in his office. A constant, low, rumbling presence, a generator of pure, cold menace. He was running his war. I was a ghost, haunting the ruins of my own life. I hated him. I hated him with a clean, sharp, diamond-hard fury that was the only thing keeping me from shattering. I hated him for what he'd done in the basement. I hated him for the kiss, for that brutal, possessive act that had stolen my breath and branded me as his. But the true, corrosive, sickening hatred was for myself. Because I had clung to him. Because when that monster had kissed me, a broken, traitorous part of my soul had held on. And because even now, trapped in this bunker, a small, cowardly animal part of me felt safe. I was his. I was the Pakhan's woman. And as I'd learned from his cold, hard logic, that meant the other monsters, the ones who had stabbed my books, would be kept at bay. I had chosen my monster. And now I was living in his cage. I was in the children's section, trying to sort the few books that had survived the rampage. I was holding a copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, its cover slashed, when the world exploded. It was not a gunshot, it was a breach, a sound so loud, so concussive it was a physical blow. The side door, the one by the periodicals room, was simply gone. A bright, violent flash, and the wall buckled. The plywood on the windows shattered inwards. Alarms blared, a high, piercing electronic shriek that drilled into my skull. Then the shouting. Spanish, furious, high-pitched battle cries. Entren, mátenlos, encuentren al oso, and the gunfire? It was not the single purposeful crack I'd heard from movies. It was a hailstorm. A series of deafening, echoing cracks that tore the air apart. Bullets thudded into the shelves, sending splinters of wood and shredded paper flying. The smell of cordite and plaster dust was immediate, choking. I screamed. I did the only thing I knew how to do. I dove. I scrambled behind the low, thick oaken shelf that held the picture books. I curled into a ball, my hands over my head, my body shaking so violently I was sure my bones would rattle apart. I was a mouse. A stupid, terrified mouse, and the walls of the den were caving in. The library was a war zone. I could hear his men. My men, I thought, with a jolt of sickness, returning fire. Their guns were heavier, a deeper, more controlled boom, boom, boom. I heard Dmitri roaring orders in Russian. I was going to die here, in the children's section. I was going to bleed out on the alphabet rug. I risked a look, peering through the small gap between the shelf and the wall. I saw him. The door to his office, the war room, was thrown open. Aleksandr emerged. He was not a student. He was not a butcher. He was a general. He was dressed in the same black clothes, but he now wore a heavy tactical vest. He held a pistol in his hand, held low with a terrifying, casual ease. He was not panicked. He was not even angry. He was focused. He was a creature of pure, lethal, cold command. He saw the firefight, saw his men pinned down by the main desk, and he began to direct them. He pointed. He shouted. And they moved. He was the eye of the storm. He was the only reason they were still alive. I watched, mesmerized by the sheer, terrifying competence of the monster. And then I saw it. My vantage point, low to the ground, showed me what Aleksandr, in the heat of the central battle, could not see. A new group. 4 men. They were moving low and fast, using the history stacks as cover. They were not engaging. They were flanking. They were bypassing the main firefight, and they were heading straight for his office. My blood turned to ice. They were going to cut off the head of the snake. They were going to get behind him. They would gun him down from the back, and he would never see it coming. My mind split in two. A part of me, the part that still remembered the kiss, the brand, the possession, screamed, let them do it. Let them kill the monster. Let them end this. If he was gone, I was free. The cage would be broken. I could run, but Run where? My mind flashed, with crystal ice water clarity, to the man in the basement, to Navaja, to the man who had thought it was funny to break the children's stools. These were those men. If they killed Aleksandr, I was not free. I was next. I was the prize, I was the bear's toy, and they would be the new owners. I remembered his voice, hissing in my ear in my apartment, the only truth I had left. I am the only monster in this city who will not let the other monsters touch you. He was my monster, and I was his. The choice was not a choice. It was a reaction. It was survival. I was moving. I scrambled from behind the shelf. I ran, my body low, my feet silent. The air was thick with smoke and the scream of ricochets. "Dmitri!" I shrieked, my voice thin and reedy in the din. He was crouched behind the circulation desk, reloading his weapon. He looked up, his eyes wide with pure, absolute shock. He had forgotten I existed. "Flankers!" I screamed, jabbing a trembling finger toward the history section. "They're going for his office! Behind you!" Dmitri's eyes widened further. He understood. He looked past me, saw the empty aisle. He saw the threat. "Sokol! Pavel!" he roared in Russian. "Bok!" "Сейчас! Flank!" "Now!" Two of his men broke from the main line, peeling off to intercept the flanking crew. But one of the cartel soldiers, the last in the line, saw me. He saw me, the small, screaming mouse who had just given away their position. He turned, his face a mask of rage, and he raised his rifle. He was 10 feet away. I was dead. I had no cover. I was standing next to the temporary, freestanding shelf we had set up for the new fiction. It was tall, oak, and loaded with heavy, hardcover books. I had no time to think. It was pure, primal instinct. The librarian's rage, the survivor's desperation, with a sound that ripped from my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated, furious terror. I shoved it. My entire body, fueled by adrenaline, slammed into the side of the shelf. It teetered, for one agonizing, slow-motion second. The soldier's eyes widened. He tried to fire, and then it crashed. It went over with a sound like a tree falling, a groan of splintering wood, and a catastrophic thunder-thud-thud of hundreds of heavy books hitting the floor. The soldier disappeared. He was gone, buried under an avalanche of oak, plaster, and Stephen King. I stood there panting, my hands out, my entire body shaking. I was covered in dust. My ears were ringing. I had done that. The library for a second fell quiet. The gunfire paused, as if stunned by the sound. I looked at the pile of books. I had killed him. With books. The terrible, hysterical irony of it bubbled in my throat. The gunfire erupted again, but the tide had turned. Dmitri's men had intercepted the flank. The cartel's surprise was broken. And I saw him. Aleksandr, he was no longer defending, he was hunting. He was moving through the smoke, his pistol raised. He was a shark. He was moving toward a man I hadn't seen before. A man in an expensive-looking silk shirt, who was not a soldier. He was holding a small gold-plated pistol, and he was terrified. Vasquez. It had to be. The rival boss saw Aleksandr coming, and he ran. He fled, blindly, looking for an escape. He ran right into the rare books room, the room of the blood books, the room that was now Alexander's personal trophy case. Aleksandr didn't run. He stalked. He followed Vasquez into the room, a predator who had finally cornered his prey. I heard from inside the room a crash, a single muffled thud, a strangled cry, and then silence. The real silence. The alarms were dead. The gunfire was over. The only sound was the groaning of the wounded, the ticking of hot metal, and the drip, drip, drip of the ruptured sprinkler system. It was over, I was still standing by the toppled shelf. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but they were steady. I was alive. I looked across the ruined, smoking, water-drenched expanse of my library. Dmitri was leaning against the desk, bleeding from his arm, but alive. He was looking at me. He nodded once. A sharp, brutal nod of respect. I was not the Pakhan's woman. I was not a prisoner. I was the woman who had toppled a bookshelf and saved their lives. I was a part of this. Aleksandr emerged from the rare books room. He was not bloody. He was not even breathing hard. He was just finished. He stopped. He saw the toppled shelf. He saw the dead soldier buried beneath it. And then he looked at me. He saw me, covered in dust, standing over my kill, in the center of his war zone. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were not cold. They were not ice. They were something else. A dark, hot, possessive awe. He had seen the mouse. He had seen the teacher. He had seen the victim. Now, for the first time, he was seeing his queen.
Chapter 12. Aleksandr. The world dissolved into a cacophony of noise. It was the wrong noise. Not the satisfying, controlled crack of my men's weapons, but the high-pitched, frantic yapping of the cartel's submachine guns. It was the sound of chaos, the sound of failure. My hand was on my pistol before the alarm even shrieked. I emerged from my office not as a man, but as a machine. The Pakhan. In these moments, there is no thought. There is no fear. There is only a cold, clear, red-tinged calculus. My men were pinned. 2 by the desk, 1 by the stacks. The breach was at the side door, a stupid, brute force entry, sloppy, but effective. Assess, prioritize, eliminate. My first target was a man with a shotgun, trying to get an angle on Dmitri. I put 2 rounds in his chest. He vanished. I moved, using the reinforced wall of my office as cover. I was directing my men, my voice a low, commanding roar over the din. Sokol, Levo, left, Pavel, suppress. We were holding. But it was a bad position. They had the numbers. They were flooding the main floor, a tide of rats. And then I saw him. Vasquez, the Mariposa. He was not a soldier. He was a coward, hiding behind his men, wearing a ridiculous silk shirt, holding a gold-plated toy. He thought this was a movie. He thought he could come into my house, my den, and kill the bear. I began to move toward him. He was the target. Cut off the head. The body dies. Then, a new sound. A sound so alien in this firefight it was like a bird singing. Dmitri. I froze. My blood, which had been running with the cold, clear focus of the fight, turned to ice. Her. She was here. My mind, the tactical part, reeled. She was supposed to be in the break room. She was supposed to be safe. She was supposed to be hidden. I risked a glance. She was not hidden. She was a ghost, a small, terrified, dust-covered thing, standing in the open, her hand jabbed toward the history section. "Flankers!" she shrieked. "Behind you!" My head snapped to the right. She was correct. 4 of them, moving low, using the stacks, bypassing my men. They were coming for me. They were coming for my back. She had seen it. From her position, low to the ground, she had seen the one tactical advantage they had. She had saved my life. Before I could even process the fact of it, before I could roar at her to get down, the last of the flanking soldiers saw her. He saw her, the one who had given the alarm. He turned, He raised his rifle. "Anna!" I roared, my voice raw. I lunged, my pistol coming up, but my angle was bad. She was 10 feet from him. He was point blank. She was a dead woman. My entire world, my entire future, compressed into that one impossible, agonizing second. And then she moved. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She didn't cower. She turned to the tall, freestanding shelf beside her, a heavy, solid oak thing my men had put up. And with a sound, a roar that was not a mouse's squeak, but the shriek of a Valkyrie, she shoved it. Her entire, small, terrified body slammed into it. The shelf teetered. The soldier fired, but his aim was off, his eyes wide with disbelief. And the shelf, with the weight of hundreds of books, went over. It was a sound like a god slamming a door, a catastrophic, thunderous crash of splintering wood and the thud of 1,000 pounds of paper hitting the floor. The soldier vanished. He was gone, buried. The firefight, for one stunned second, stopped. Every man, mine and theirs, froze. My Maishanok, my little mouse, my timid librarian who was afraid of loud noises, had just killed a man. With a bookshelf. A sound, a low, savage, proud rumble, tore itself from my chest. It was a laugh. She was magnificent. She was chaos. She was Moya. The spell broke. The tide had turned. My men, saved from the flank, now had the advantage. They surged forward, a disciplined, brutal force. The cartel's attack collapsed into a panicked, screaming rout, but I was no longer interested in the soldiers. My eyes found Vasquez. He was staring, his gold-plated pistol limp in his hand, at the toppled bookshelf. He was staring at her. He, too, had seen it. His eyes, wide with terror, met mine. He saw his men falling. He saw his attack broken, and he saw the bear, the one he had come to kill, walking toward him, his face a promise of death. He ran. The coward turned and fled, scrambling blindly into the rare books room. My trophy room, the room with her blood books. He had chosen his own tomb. I did not run. I stalked. I followed him in. He was at the back, fumbling with the lock on the bulletproof window, the one I'd installed for display. He was trapped. He spun around, raising his ridiculous toy gun. "Aléjate! Stay back." I just looked at him. I looked at the man who had ordered my library, her sanctuary, to be destroyed. I looked at the man who had sent his animal to break her children's stools. I looked at the man who had, in his pathetic, ignorant pride, tried to kill what was mine. "You brought filth into my house," I whispered, my voice a low, cold calm. He fired. The pop of the small-caliber weapon was a joke. The bullet went wide, chipping a piece of marble off a display pedestal. I closed the distance. Before he could fire again, I had his wrist. I squeezed. The sound of his bones, small, delicate like a bird's, snapping was sharp and satisfying. He shrieked, the gold gun clattering to the floor. You stabbed her books!" I growled, my other hand seizing his throat, lifting him from his feet, slamming him against the wall. He gurgled, his feet kicking, his eyes bulging with pure animal terror. "And you frightened her." I did not use a gun. I did not use a blade. I used my hands. The hands she had been so terrified of. The hands that had bled into the wall. It was quick. It was silent. It was just. I let his body slide to the floor, a broken, silk-shirted pile of trash. I looked down at my knuckles. The white gauze was soaked, but not with my blood. I stepped back, my breath steady, the red haze of the Pakhan receding. The cold, clear calm of the man settled back in. It was over. I walked out of the room. The battle was done. The alarms were silent. My men were securing the last of the prisoners. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of the sprinklers. Dmitri was by the desk, bleeding but alive. He was looking at her. My eyes found her. She was still there, by her mountain of slain books. She was covered in dust, her hair a wild halo, her body trembling. But she was standing. She was a soldier surveying the field. She was not the mouse. She was not the librarian. She was not the prisoner. She was the woman who had shone in the center of my darkness. She was the only thing in this entire ruined, bloody room that was clean. She was my Koroleva, my queen. I walked to her, my feet crunching on glass. I saw her eyes, wide and dazed, find me. I saw her look at my bloody wrapped hand. I expected fear, revulsion, the same horror I'd seen in the basement. She just watched me. I stopped in front of her. I couldn't find the words. Pakhan, student, lover. None of them were right. None of them were enough. And then she reached out. Her small, shaking, dirt-covered hand. It didn't flinch. It came up and it touched me. It rested with a feather-light pressure on my bloody knuckles. She was not afraid. She was accepting. She was claiming the monster. A sound, something raw and broken, lodged in my throat. Moya, I whispered. Mine. It was the only word I had. I cupped her face, my hand a stark, clean contrast to her dirt-streaked skin. I needed to ground myself. I needed to prove this was real, that she was real. It is over, I vowed. He is gone. They are all gone. I leaned in and pressed my lips to her forehead. It was not the kiss from the office. It was not possession. It was not conquest. It was surrender. It was the Pakhan, the bear, the oso, finally, irrevocably, bending his knee.
Chapter 13. Anna Epilogue. The bell over the front door tinkled. It was a small, bright, silvery sound, like a wind chime. It was the first thing I had insisted on during the rebuild. Not an electronic beep or a sterile chime, but a real old-fashioned brass bell. It was the sound of welcome, the sound of safe. I looked up from the new, gleaming, solid oak circulation desk. It was 10:30 a.m. on a bright, sunny Tuesday, and the library was loud. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was the sound of children actually laughing in the new children's section. It was the sound of the new espresso machine hissing and gurgling in the community cafe corner, run by a local co-op. It was the sound of two old men arguing over a chess game in the periodical's wing. It was the sound of life, bright, messy, and wonderfully, gloriously loud. "Mrs. Petrov," I called out, my voice bright. "You're early." The Russian papers don't arrive for another hour. The old woman bustled in, her face, which I had only ever known as a mask of quiet grief, now permanently etched with a cheerful, grandmotherly crinkle. She was carrying a tin. "For you, Direktorochka," she said, her new pet name for me. Little Director. She slid the tin, still warm, across the polished oak. "Cherry piroshki, and for the big man," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I put extra. He is a serious person. He needs his sugar. I laughed, the sound easy and real. Thank you, Zoya. He will be thrilled, but you know he's trying to... Watch his figure. Zoya cackled, a dry, papery sound. That man? He is not a man. He is a mountain. A mountain needs snow on the peak. Now you eat. She patted my hand, the one that now wore a simple, unadorned, impossibly heavy band of platinum. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw our shared, unspoken history. She, a woman who had fled the Bratva world, and I, the woman who had married its king. She nodded once, a gesture of profound, woman-to-woman understanding, and bustled off to the cafe. I looked around my library. My world. It had been 6 months since the firefight. 6 months since I had toppled a bookshelf and he had ended a war. The library was reborn. He had, as promised, rebuilt it. But he had not just rebuilt. Aleksandr Volkov did not understand half measures. He had resurrected it. He had poured millions into this building. The walls were reinforced plaster, painted a warm, inviting cream, but I knew that beneath the plaster was a web of Kevlar and steel. The shelves were solid, dark, gleaming mahogany, each one custom-built and bolted, I was sure, to the concrete foundation. The carpet was a rich, thick, royal blue, so plush it absorbed the sound of footsteps, making the laughter of the children seem to float in the air. And the windows. My beautiful, high, arched windows. They were back, gleaming and clear, letting in floods of morning light. For soundproofing, Aleksandr had claimed, his face a perfect mask of innocence when he'd reviewed the invoices with me. So the city traffic does not disturb your story time? I knew they were bulletproof. I knew they were probably bomb-proof. I knew that the new security system, hidden behind discreet panels, was military grade. I knew that the two large, quiet custodians, who always seemed to be polishing the same brass rail, were, in fact, two of his most trusted men. It was a fortress. It was a haven. It was, finally, both. I was no longer just the librarian. I was the director of the Volkov Community Endowment and Library. I had a staff of 4 actual, certified, wonderful librarians, all vetted, I was sure, by a terrified-looking Dmitri, who was now the public-facing CEO of Volkov Global Logistics. My new office was in the front of the building, with a massive, beautiful, and bulletproof window that let me watch the world go by. His business. It was still here. I was not a fool. He was still the Pakhan. But the treaty we had forged in the ashes of that battle held. He had cleaned his operations, or at least, he had cleaned them out of my basement. Volkov Global Logistics, he'd called it. His import-export company now had a legitimate steel and glass headquarters downtown. His old office, my old office, was now Dmitri's official satellite branch. The men who came and went were in crisp suits, carrying briefcases, and they whispered. And the basement? My heart still gave a small, strange thump when I thought of it. I had gone down there, 1 week after the renegotiation, my hand in his, my heart in my throat. The concrete box was gone. The smell of blood and bleach had been scoured from the earth. In its place was a state-of-the-art, climate-controlled, museum-quality archive, glass cases, humidity monitors, soft archival lighting. And in the center, on a velvet pedestal, was the Anna Karenina, the blood book. Its slashed leather spine had been meticulously, lovingly repaired by the finest bookbinder in Europe. It was a scar, a reminder of the violence, but it was also a promise, a symbol of what we had built. The other blood books were arranged around it, their beauty no longer a sin, but a treasure. The bell over the door tinkled again. My head snapped up. 5 p.m. on the dot. My heart, which no longer hammered in fear, gave a familiar, steady, possessive thump of recognition. He walked in. He was not the mountain of rage from the first night. He was not the monster from the basement. He was my husband. He was magnificent. He was in a sharp, dark gray suit that probably cost more than my college education, his dark hair slightly damp from the spring rain. He held his phone to his ear, and he was talking. Loudly. No, he was saying, his voice a low, commanding rumble that still carried across the entire main floor. Several patrons looked up, smiled, and then wisely looked back down. I don't care what the port authority says. You tell them that my shipment will be cleared by morning, or I will buy the port de potum. He saw me watching. He was approaching the desk, a slow, predatory wolfish grin spreading across his face. It was an expression that no longer terrified me. It was an expression that was just for me. I just raised an eyebrow. I didn't say a word. I just gave him the look. The management look. The shush look. His grin widened. He sighed, a theatrical, long-suffering sound, and hung up the phone, pocketing it. He stopped in front of the desk. My desk, the original massive oak one, which I had insisted we salvage and restore. Its old, deep scars were still visible beneath the new, high-gloss varnish. A perfect metaphor for us. My apologies, Direktorochka, he rumbled, his voice low and laced with an amusement that was a private language between us. A very loud client. He was disturbing the peace. It's 5 o'clock, Aleksandr, I said, trying to sound stern, a smile tugging at my lips. I could feel the blush rising on my neck. He still had this effect on me. The library is closing. You know the rules. Ah, yes. He leaned in, planting his large, scarred hands on the desk, caging me in, just as he had done all those months ago. But this time, it was not a threat. It was a homecoming. The rules? Inside voices, I whispered. I am being very quiet, he whispered back, his voice a rough velvet that vibrated straight through me. He leaned across the desk and kissed me. It was a long, slow, deep, possessive kiss. It tasted of him, of ozone, of power, and of the coffee he'd just had. It was a kiss that said, "You are mine." It was a kiss that said, "I am home." It was a kiss that said, "I am the Pakhan, and this is my queen, and this is my kingdom." I melted into it, my hands coming up to rest on his suit lapels. Behind me, I heard one of the new librarians, a young man named Ben, clear his throat. Ahem. Director Petrova. I'll just go lock the periodicals room. I pulled back, my face burning, my lips stinging. Aleksandr was smiling, his eyes dark with an intensity that still stole my breath. You are a menace, Aleksandr Volkov, I murmured, straightening my cardigan. I am improving, he countered. He straightened, tapping his briefcase. But I have a problem. A complex issue. It requires your management expertise. Oh, I said, raising an eyebrow. Is it the Port Authority? Did you buy it again? Worse. His face became a mask of gruff, exaggerated frustration. He opened his briefcase. Inside, next to his tablet and a stack of files, was a book. He pulled it out. My heart didn't just melt, it evaporated. It wasn't Curious George. It was a massive, new, leather-bound copy of War and Peace. This Tolstoy, he growled, tapping the cover. He is very long, and he uses too many words. I cannot focus. I looked at him. My monster. My husband. The man who ran a global empire, who had ended a war in my library, who could read a financial report in 3 languages. And he was using a 1,200-page Russian epic as an excuse to be alone with his wife. This was our ritual. This was our game. I laughed. a soft, happy sound that was just for him. I came around the desk, and he immediately pulled me against his side, his arm a possessive, heavy, comforting weight around my waist. "You are a terrible, terrible liar," I whispered, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I am a Pakhan," he corrected, his voice a low growl in my ear. "But I still require my teacher. I'm sure." I smiled, my heart so full I felt it might actually burst. I took his free hand, the one with the healed white scars on the knuckles, the hand that had killed for me, the hand that had held me, and I laced my fingers through his. "Come on," I said, leading him away from the desk, past the new, happy, bustling life of the library. "Let's go home." He didn't move. He just gently tugged my hand, pulling me in a different direction. Not toward the front door. He pulled me toward the children's section, now empty and quiet as the last of the families filtered out. He sat down, not on a tiny stool, but on the new, comfortable, adult-sized reading bench. He pulled me down onto his lap, his arms caging me in, his nose burying in my hair. "This," he whispered, his voice thick, his lips brushing my ear. "This is home." He opened the book. "Now." Chapter 1. I smiled, settling against his chest, the safest I had ever been. He was the monster. And he was my shield. And he was finally all mine.